Just sadly, the polls closed several hours ago, and this policy debate can have no influence. So, let's go back to the results, Emily.
They might prefer to be talking about policy right now. I think there is a tangible nervousness amongst Democrats, certainly on social media, at what is starting to happen, the picture that's starting to emerge in the battleground states. And here is why. None of these are over. They are all races still being counted, and you can see that we haven't got the full tallies in. But in Florida, that absolutely critical battleground state, which Obama only won, let me remind you, by 1% last time round, Donald Trump has the lead on 49% share of the vote, with 89% of the precincts in. Virginia, he leads again, 49% share of the vote to Clinton's 46%. They've got 83% in here. Ohio, he's extended his lead here, only 37% on. That could change, but on current predictions, he's on 52% share of the vote to Clinton's 44%. Why is this important? Because we began the night talking about how mathematically difficult it was for Donald Trump to find a path to the White House. Not impossible, but tricky. He needs what they call in poker an inside straight, everything to fall into place. And at the moment, with those races going the way they are, everything is falling into place. So let me just show you how the map has coloured up so far, putting Trump in the lead with 129 of those electoral college votes. He needs 270. Clinton short by 166 on 104. This is how the results have coloured up so far. If we add in the polls, the campaign polls, maybe you have doubts about the campaign polls at this point, but let's add in how the campaign polling left the state of the race. What they've done is essentially coloured up all the safe states for either party. The grey ones are the battlegrounds that we were just talking about. Now let's just play around with this. I'm going to go into my calculator, pick up the red pen, and imagine that he has actually won the races that we've now seen him taking a lead in. If he has won Florida, if he has won Virginia, if he goes on to win Virginia, if he does win Ohio, let's imagine that he wins the states that we haven't had results from yet, that Mitt Romney won for the Republicans in 2012, Arizona and North Carolina. They were Republican last time round. On these predictions, there is a sort of collective gasp, isn't there? He's only short by 4. He can get that with New Hampshire. He can get that with Iowa. He can get that with the 2nd Congressional District of Maine and one other, maybe Nevada. Now, none of this is real. If you've just joined us, if you just switched on, this is not the picture. Yeah, we have to have a massive warning sign on. This is my calculator, and this is the path that he could take to victory. But that's how the map looks at the moment. And those are the 3 that we're comparing, which, as things stand, show Trump ahead in each one. If he pulls those off, it suddenly becomes a whole lot easier.
Of those 3, the one I'm worried about the most as a Trumpster is Virginia, because generally the votes of the counties right near Washington, D.C., where all the government workers live and tend to vote Democratic, heavily Democratic, they come in last. So I'm not counting my...
Well, you're not counting your Virginias yet.
But there's
that's
still
right.
84% in.
Yeah.
There's still 84% in there.
And why
he's
do
got
those
a
votes
3%
come in
lead.
last?
I don't know, but they always do. We've gotten
I
whipsawed
told you, they're
many
slow,
times.
well-educated, they're slow counters. That's the reason. Ohio, 40% of the precincts in Ohio, Mr. Trump is 8 points ahead. We can't project it yet, but you would have to say that Ohio is trending strongly to Donald Trump. And, of course, it's a state he has to win. Now, yesterday and today, the market soared on the prospect of a Hillary Clinton victory. That's what they thought was going to happen. Now that they've looked at the results coming in, I can tell you that Dow Futures, which is a financial mechanism that tells you what's going to happen when the Dow opens earlier Wednesday morning, it's down 300. Down 300. That's a lot. It went up 300 before the election. It's now going down 300 on the futures. The financial market's now not so clear of the result as they thought before the markets closed today. So let's go straight to Clinton headquarters now, and to John Sopel is there. John, I suspect they're beginning to look a little bit worried at Clinton headquarters.
You know, about an hour and a half ago, Andrew, every time new figures came in, it was all looking quite good. There were big cheers. Everybody in this crowd here is either looking at one of the American networks, which are being projected on the big screens, or looking at their phones, and they're getting increasingly anxious and they're getting increasingly nervous. And this wasn't the evening that they had anticipated, having looked at the latest polls, having looked at the lead into the final days of this campaign, all the organisation that they had on the ground. And Donald Trump seems to be pulling off what he managed during the primary races, that he didn't have the great ground game and the kind of infrastructure in place, but was still able to perform very well on social media and with the message that he's delivering. And if you're looking at Florida, for example, and many of the other places, what you're seeing is that kind of real split in America. Not the splits that we've all discussed in terms of, you know, the sort of disaffected white, blue-collar, older worker, but also the differences between the rural communities and the urban. You know, you look at the numbers that are piling up in the rural areas of Florida, for example, and yet it's all about what might happen in the cities. It does show the deep fissures in American society at the moment that have been brought out, and so you've got sort of Donald Trump outperforming what Mitt Romney managed in Republican areas, and yet in certain urban areas Hillary Clinton doing extremely well, and that just kind of lays bare some of the splits in American society that this election has brought out.
John, what are they looking for there now, do you think? I mean, we always knew Florida was going to be close. It is close. Mr. Trump's ahead at the moment, but it's not over yet. I guess the biggest surprise for them, I would suggest, is Virginia. Now, we know that Virginia, some of the northern parts have still to report, and they will be more pro-Mrs. Clinton. But even if in the end she was to swing it in Virginia, it was never meant to be this difficult there. She hasn't been there since July. She stopped spending money there. Suddenly, it's in contest.
But so did he. He thought it was over 3 or 4 weeks ago. At the time when that tape emerged, the Access Hollywood tape emerged, there was then a certain amount of Republicans putting distance between themselves and his campaign. And there was a protest outside Republican headquarters, which was led by the person who was running the campaign for Trump in Virginia. And he got in huge trouble over it because he was furious that Donald Trump was pulling resources out of Virginia because he thought that was premature. And then latterly, Donald Trump has gone back into Virginia and seems to be doing very well. Now, as we say, like Florida, where you're waiting for Broward County, in Virginia you're waiting for those northern counties which border Washington, D.C. But Virginia was never seen as kind of one of the areas where Trump might do very, very well.
Now I want to start out by thanking
Thanks for that, John. Katie.
Let's get a quick check-in in Ohio. Barbara Pledasher's there in Cleveland. Again, another state we can't call it yet, Ohio. 41% of precincts counted, Barbara. It's looking like Trump 52-44. You're in a bar that is mostly Democrats, mostly Clinton supporters. What are they making of this?
Yeah, watching closely. You're right, there are a lot of Clinton supporters in this area thinking that she might be able to pull it off, but not quite sure. Different kinds of voting patterns in play here, and I've got a couple of guests who can talk them through with me. First of all, Edward Horowitz. He's a political communications professor at Cleveland State. Mr. Horowitz, there's been a lot of talk about Mr. Trump making inroads with so-called blue-collar Democrats. Is that a really significant issue?
Right. So here in Ohio, the problem that Democrats face is that the blue-collar workers, less educated, high school educated white males particularly, in more of the rural parts of the state have been energized for Donald Trump. When you drive through outside of metropolitan area like Cleveland, you see tons and tons of signs for Donald Trump. So I think he's very appealing to them. The simplistic messages of, you know, I will bring jobs back, I will turn things around, auto plants will return. I think for them, it's not so clear how those things are going to happen, but they really believe, they have a lot of faith that he will do it for them. Whether that can happen or not is a big question.
Well, if he can peel away blue-collar Democrats. Can Mrs. Clinton peel away Republicans in the sort of affluent suburbs who don't like him, who are dismayed by him? Because there are quite a lot of those too, aren't there?
Absolutely. I mean, women are the major key factor in so many of these races. Here in Ohio, the suburban voters, the women, they've been particularly appealed to Hillary Clinton because of a lot of the comments Donald Trump made, the Access Hollywood tic-tac tape where he talked about assaulting women. So women have been seen as a primary vote for Hillary Clinton, but whether that translates because of the enthusiasm gap. A lot of people are just unhappy with Hillary Clinton. They're unhappy with Donald Trump. Whether they showed up today in the polls is a big question. But with so many people voting early, that seemed to be indicative that a lot of people were supporting Hillary Clinton.
And what about the black vote? I'm now speaking to Michael Nelson. He's from the NAACP, the president of the Cleveland chapter. How important is the black vote here in Ohio?
For Hillary Clinton to win, there has to be a tremendous turnout in the black community. And one of the issues that in the black community is the lack of enthusiasm. And I can explain that because after Barack Obama, which was the penultimate emotional and political accomplishment for black Americans, anything after that was going to be a significant drop-off. So I'm not really that surprised about the lack of enthusiasm, but my concern is that people have to be able to translate a vote for Hillary Clinton into their own best interest, or just vote in their own best interest. And sitting it out is not how you do that. You know, and then they get a lesson from George Bush and his wife, who didn't vote for either candidate. So we have that dichotomy. And then we have this civil war going on, this cultural civil war, where the middle-class blacks versus poor blacks, police versus blacks, Republicans versus Republicans, and we're caught up in that as well.
Do you think that if the black vote doesn't come out strongly enough, that could lose Ohio for Mrs. Clinton?
Well, remember, Barack Obama won Ohio by 150,000 votes in 2012, and he won Cuyahoga County, which is where you're doing this interview, by 250,000 votes. So you have to get tremendous turnout in the black community for a Democrat to be successful, period.
So, lots of different irons in the fire here, lots of voting patterns to take into consideration to determine who actually wins this state. But of course, Mr. Trump does have to win it if he wants that path to the White House.
Okay, Barbara Pletasher there for us in Cleveland, Ohio, looking like a nail-biter as well.
Well, it is, and I'm seeing reports. CBS, one of the other big networks in the United States, is saying Michigan is now a toss-up. Mr. Obama won Michigan by 9.5%. There's even a lot of chatter, unconfirmed, that things are not that he necessarily win, but he's putting in Mr. Trump a strong performance in Minnesota. Now, Minnesota didn't even vote for Ronald Reagan. Well, most of the other parts of the country did. Emily?
I just had three comparisons, didn't I? Florida, Ohio and Virginia, which all showed Donald Trump ahead. This is a really exciting moment, I think, for the Trump campaign, because not only are they starting to feel pretty optimistic about those three, but look, here's three brand new ones that we haven't shown you as a comparison before: North Carolina, Michigan and New Hampshire, and each of those have Donald Trump ahead. In North Carolina, he's on 49.4% share of the vote. Michigan, this is a very interesting one, and Andrew was just mentioning this. I remember when he went to Michigan, to the town of Flint, which suffered a bad water poisoning scandal, and the line he used there was, it used to be that you made cars in Michigan, in Flint, you couldn't drink the water in Mexico. Now, the cars are made in Mexico, and you can't drink the water in Flint. Whether or not that is true is almost beside the point. He has spoken to people in this part of the world, Michigan bordering Ohio, those Rust Belt states around the Great Lakes, which may yet be carrying his message still further into territories that the Democrats never really dreamed that they could be in danger of losing. New Hampshire, very, very closely fought now. They're both on 47% share of the vote, but he has got the lead here. Now, this is starting to look like a much better night for Donald Trump and his campaign team than any of the pollsters had predicted before we came on air. This is how the map has coloured up so far. You can see that we've still got quite a way to go, because none of the races that I've been talking about are in yet. They're all in grey, and they'll stay in grey until there is an actual projection and they've been called. But let me just take you to the list. This is where the polls closed in the last few minutes, and those are the ones that we've had colouring up.
Emily, thanks for that. Let me just show you the share of the national vote. 22% of the country's precincts have voted. And this is how that 22% have voted. Now, remember, parts of the West Coast and the West are still voting, but Mr. Trump has taken 50% Hillary Clinton, 46% of votes cast so far. The other 4% gone probably to the other two candidates that have been in this race, a Green Party and a Libertarian candidate. We'll get some comments from our panel in just a moment, but let's first of all catch up with all the latest news from Clive Myrie.
Andrew, many thanks. The polls have closed in all but 10 states across America, and the vote tally shows Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump running neck and neck in several key battleground areas. Laura Bicker has the latest.
Decision Day 2016, and the campaign may have been ugly, but voters turned out in their millions. Around 15% of them told pollsters it was their first time. As dusk fell across the East Coast, the lines were still long. Of course, this is America, so in Colorado, you could even stay in the car and vote. The biggest battle seems to be in Florida, where exit polls suggest it is too close to call. Voters have re-elected the Republican Senator Marco Rubio, who ran for president against Donald Trump.
This is an extraordinary place, Florida. It is the collection of all of the things that make us the greatest nation on earth, of people who have lived here for decades, of the descendants of slaves, of the children of immigrants. Florida is America, and it's such an honor to be able to represent this extraordinary state.
A high turnout could be a good sign for the woman who wishes to be the first female president. Hillary Clinton voted near her home in New York, a state she has won.
It is the most humbling feeling, Dan, because, I know how much responsibility goes with this, and so many people are counting on the outcome of this election, what it means for our country, and I'll do the very best I can if I'm fortunate enough to win today.
Just a few miles away, her rival also cast his ballot.
Looking very good.
As the votes are counted, there were signs of just how bitter, how divisive this campaign has become. At least one couple are no longer talking to one another. Polls have now closed in Wisconsin, where the highest-ranking Republican in the US, Paul Ryan, looks relaxed, despite distancing himself from the party's nominee for president. Meanwhile, for the candidates, there is a tense evening ahead. As counting gets underway, they can only watch and wait. Laura Bicker, BBC News, Washington.
In other news, at least one person has been shot dead near a polling station in California, and 3 others have been injured. Witnesses say the attacker, who was heavily armed, opened fire on a group of people in Azusa, 40 kilometers east of Los Angeles. The gunman then barricaded himself inside a house. The British banker Rorik Jutting has been found guilty of murdering 2 Indonesian women in Hong Kong. Their mutilated bodies were found in his apartment in November 2014. In a statement read by his lawyer in court, Jutting expressed remorse for the killings. Prince Harry has criticised media coverage of his relationship with the American actress Meghan Markle, saying she's been subjected to a wave of abuse and harassment. In a statement, the prince said he tried to develop a thick skin about the level of interest in his private life, but the past week had seen a line crossed. Iraqi forces say they've retaken the first neighborhood close to the center of the city of Mosul as they continue to battle so-called Islamic State. Our Middle East correspondent Quentin Somerville is one of the first broadcasters to reach the newly recaptured Saddam district on the northeastern side of Mosul.
With heavy armour and steady caution, Mosul city was breached tonight. Iraqi special forces pushed forward in the dark and under fire. We've just moved about 5 kilometres from the east, right inside Mosul city centre. We're about 3 kilometres from the Nineveh ruins, which really is the heart of this city. As you can hear, this is still a very active area. It's far more dangerous than where we were before. The Islamic State were here this morning.
Quentin Somerville reporting there. That's it. Now it's back to Andrew and Cathy.
And back here in Times Square, this presidential race just gets a lot more interesting and a lot more uncertain. Let's bring you up to date. Let's go to our drone camera in Times Square. There's the BBC billboard over Times Square. Mrs. Clinton, 104 Electoral College votes. Donald Trump, 137. The magic number to become the next president is 270. 270. So a way to go yet. Basically, let me come back to you as a Trump supporter. The night is clearly going better for him than many thought. Detroit Free Press, though, has called Michigan for Mrs. Clinton. It's been a lot narrower than people thought, but they're still calling it. If that is the case, his road to the White House is still narrow. He's not there yet.
It is still narrow, but one thing we can take from this, regardless of the outcome, and that is that Donald Trump has exceeded the expectations of the media and the political class, and he has set the stage for a real political revolution in the United States, because you can see from the popular vote that there are millions and millions of Americans who want a straight-talking, honest, non-politician in government. The days when only the political class can run for these offices. This is essentially a contest between a builder and a blabber, right? Somebody who makes buildings for a living, and somebody who has always made her living being a politician and talking about politics. And you can see that there's a lot of interest in this country in someone who's on the outside coming in.
But is it not a little bit worrying that a lot of the businesses he's built then went bankrupt? You don't want that to happen to the country.
Let me just address that in one sentence, because he's in the real estate business where each building is a separate business, and it's very common in the real estate business for an individual
Trump
building
Airlines
to go bankrupt.
Trump University.
I'm telling you, if you look at
Trump Steaks, Trump Vodka.
If you look at his disclosure form, 185 profit-making ventures. If 3 or 4 go bankrupt, that's how many pitchers pitch a perfect game every time?
Okay, Betsy, let me ask you a question. Given the results are so narrow tonight, we don't know what's going to happen at the end of the night. We don't know whether Donald Trump is going to be president-elect.
Could even go into the House of Representatives, as it has in the past.
As it has once in the past.
That's right, he would win in the House of Representatives, for sure.
Okay, so if he's not President-elect Trump tomorrow morning, given how close these results have been, what do you think he's going to do?
I have no idea what he personally will do. But I do know that the political establishment in Washington will have to heed these results either way, and there is a new Republican Party in the making, or a third party if they don't listen. This is the beginning of a big movement.
Okay, we know you have to go, I think.
But thank you for hosting me. I really enjoyed it.
Betsy, thank you for joining the table.
Let's just get some quick reactions from the rest of our panel, then I think you're going to go to Minnesota, Kathy. You were smiling a lot earlier on. Looking a little grimmer now.
Yeah, well, I'm clenching my teeth a little bit. Look, the night is tighter than Democrats like myself would have liked it to be, but I do think it's a young night. No battleground states have been called at this point. States like Virginia, as Betsy pointed out, the vote around the D.C. suburbs comes in late. A respected Florida strategist that was the senior advisor of President Obama's campaigns have been following closely in the state of Florida. He's saying that there's record turnout among Democrats in the cities, but record turnout for Trump supporters in ex-urban areas, keeping this very tight. One of the reasons it's going to be a late night is that the Democratic wall might be in the West tonight, where the Hispanic population is very strong. There was a record early vote turnout among Hispanics in the state of Nevada, and the early returns in the state of Colorado are strong for Democrats. So we may have to wait until the wee hours for a verdict.
Indeed. Susan, what's your reaction so far?
Well, I think Betsy made a great point earlier, saying that Donald Trump has exceeded expectations. He is really, I mean, especially for me, and I am someone who did say he would never make it through the primary and everything. But I am surprised that he's doing so well, and there is something for the Republican Party to learn. We have to listen to what the people are saying on the ground. Now, Virginia is a shocker that it's so close. I think Democrats thought they had it in the bag and Republicans walked away from it. Okay. But if Michigan is being called for Donald Trump, is being called for Mrs. Clinton, that really limits the path.
It does indeed, Kathy.
Okay, let's go to Minnesota, to Senator Amy Klobuchar, Democratic Senator. Thank you so much for waiting for us, Senator. We've had so many results
Katie,
coming
thank
in
you.
and so much going on here, but thank you. You are a Clinton supporter. You've always been a supporter of Hillary Clinton's. How are you feeling at this stage of the night?
Well, I think, as was just pointed out, it is still early. I come from the state where Al Franken won by 312 votes. And so we're used to cliffhangers in our state. But we have you just mentioned the Michigan with Detroit. The newspaper just said that they thought that Michigan would go to Hillary Clinton. We've got Florida and Virginia very tight. So far, we just simply don't know enough, except that we won the Senate race. We turned one Senate seat in Illinois, first Asian woman out of Illinois, so we're excited about that. Nevada, as you've just pointed out about the western states and the strong Hispanic vote, is looking very good there for us in the Senate race. And then again, I think what we've seen here is record turnout of both Trump supporters and Clinton supporters. There's no doubt about that.
Donald Trump has always said during the course of this campaign, particularly during the last few days, that he could reach states that people didn't expect him to reach. He's even mentioned your state, Minnesota, long been a true blue Democratic state. Are you nervous about the possibility of Donald Trump doing better than one might have expected in Minnesota tonight? Because that's what some of the reports are suggesting.
Well, Minnesota, interestingly enough, on the maps, we didn't get a lot of attention, but we were always kind of a light blue state. If you don't think we have independent voters, I have 3 words for you: Governor Jesse Ventura. We also are a state where we have always gone Democratic. At the end of many races, including Al Gore's and John Kerry, they were both in Minnesota the few days before the polls closed, because of the fact that we can be a little closer. We have significant rural areas. We are the 5th biggest farm state. And so it wouldn't surprise me if it was a little closer, if the country is closer. But I still feel good about the chances for Hillary Clinton in Minnesota.
Can I ask you about your colleagues in the Senate? The Democrats are net up 1. I think it's the Senate races have been coming in thick and fast, but I think Tammy Duckworth takes you to net up 1 in the Senate. How are the Democrats' chances looking at this stage in the evening of taking back the Senate, which I imagine for you would be particularly important were Donald Trump to take some of these battleground states and win the White House?
Right. I think it's also important for the Supreme Court. As you know, Katty, we have had a vacant seat for the longest time in modern history. And so what's happened here is we are feeling good about those numbers in Nevada with Catherine Cortez Masto, who would be Latina woman, for Attorney General of Nevada. The numbers have looked good there for quite a while. So if we hold that seat, that's Harry Reid's seat, we win Illinois, that means to take back the Senate, we need 3 more seats if Hillary Clinton is to win the presidency, 4 more. And again, I'm going to focus on Hillary Clinton winning the presidency. We need 3 seats, and they could either be in a combination of Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, Missouri, or North Carolina. Those are the 5 states that have been most at play.
Okay,
and
Senator
we just don't know
thank
yet.
you very
It's
much
too
for
close
joining
to
us.
call. Okay, it was great to be on.
Yeah, we'll
Thank
be
you.
watching. We'll be watching. Thank you, Senator.
Too close to call is the phrase of the night. Ohio, one of the states Mr. Trump must win. 50% of the precincts are in. He's 10 points ahead. A little bit too early yet for us to project it for Mr. Trump, but it's clearly trending Donald Trump's way. We've got the first picture of Donald Trump of the night since the polls closed. His campaign manager posted it on her social media site, and there they are, looking very happy, thumbs up. Maybe they haven't heard that Michigan is being, by the local newspapers, projected for Hillary Clinton, but that's unofficial. Anyway, happy Trump there. Let's just see how happy they are. We'll go over to Trump headquarters. Laura Trevelyan is there. Laura.
68%. Well, I can tell you, Andrew, the mood has changed here completely. It was a little bit funeral-like, was it not, Jason Meister, when the night began? I'm joined now by Jason Meister from the Trump campaign. Jason, how are you feeling now?
I'm feeling very confident. You know, there was a little bit nervous Nellies in the beginning, as it always is, but the late voting, we saw a surge for Trump. In Florida, we saw the Pensacola area surging for Trump. I think Florida's going to get called very soon for Trump. We are seeing Ohio, he's doing very well. Michigan, he's doing well. North Carolina, he's doing well. So I think that we're going to have a very good night.
He was pretty much mocked for going to Michigan and Minnesota, where public polls were showing a very solid Clinton lead. Do you feel like you're burning that Clinton firewall?
I think we're scaling the wall. I think we're going to hopefully, and I'm not going to get ahead of myself, I think we're going to scale that wall, and we're going to hopefully burn that wall, and we're going to hopefully build a wall. But I think that I think tonight's going to be a success. I think it comes down to three issues. It comes down to immigration, it comes down to the economy, and it comes down to national security. National security and immigration are definitely tied together in this country as an issue, but I think those are the three issues, and I think that, unfortunately for Americans, the media have focused too much, the liberal media has focused too much on hot mic tapes from 11 years ago and things that aren't important to Americans.
Right, but we're also seeing, aren't we, in Florida, an absolutely record turnout, a record Hispanic turnout,
No question.
but a record turnout in the what they call the ex-urban counties by Trump supporters.
That's right. And by the way, I don't think that you should say that the surge in Latino voters and is all for Hillary. I think there's a lot of Latino voters and African-American voters, more so than Romney and McCain, that are coming over to Trump. I think he's delivered a message that he's not the Republican candidate. He's a successful businessman. He's an outsider.
Right.
And he's going to take on both political establishments and the media.
Is it possible, though, that Hillary Clinton has a Western firewall out there that can stop you?
I don't think so. I think that she has her Western states that we all expected. I don't think that she has a Western wall that's going to be able to overcome the East Coast and the Mid-Atlantic that we're seeing Trump's doing.
Jason Meister, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So there you go. The mood completely transformed here, Andrew, at Trump headquarters from early on tonight. Speaking to Trump supporters who were trying to put the best face on it. They believed the polls, and now they really feel that their man has a shot at the White House.
Thanks, Laura. Well, they may be happy where you are at Trump HQ. They're not happy in the financial markets. We now understand that Dow Futures, which predicts how the American main board will open in, which will now be about 11 hours' time, they're now down 500 points. And if tonight continues the way it's begun, the financial markets, not just in America, but across the world, could be in for a hammering when they open because of the prospect of Mr. Trump in the White House. We know, of course, the financial markets don't always get things right. I should just point out that this is a two-horse race. Of course, it nearly always is in the United States. But Gary Johnson, the Libertarian candidate, who's also been running along with a Green candidate, there were 4 people in total, he's got so far about 1 million votes, which is not bad for a third-party candidate that didn't get much publicity, and is maybe a small indicator of unhappiness in part of the population with the main choice that they were faced with tonight. Anyway, over 1 million votes to the Libertarian candidate. He was once governor of New Mexico, twice, 2-term governor there. Emily.
We've been looking at some of the races, the battlegrounds, where Trump has taken a lead, but I don't want you to start thinking that the race is over. It isn't, and I can show you a comparison of places that Clinton has taken the lead. Pennsylvania and Colorado very much going her way on the precincts that we have counted already, and that's only 29% in Pennsylvania, but you can see she's got a good, solid lead there of nearly 20%, 58% to Trump's 39%. Here in Colorado, she also takes the lead on this increasingly Hispanic demographic here, 44% of the precincts in there. This is an odd one because all I can say is that when I put it up 5 minutes ago, Clinton had the lead in Wisconsin, and they did think this was pretty safe blue. But again, this forms part of that Great Lakes area, the Rust Belt area. If Trump is looking positive in places like Ohio, in places like Michigan, which now we're hearing might not be as easy, he might start to be able to move into areas like Wisconsin. He has taken the lead here, but again, just 23% share of the vote. So at the beginning of the night, we asked what kind of pathway could Trump carve out for himself to get to the White House? At this point, I just want to show you what sort of pathway Hillary Clinton would need. This is the state of the race as things colour up in real life, as it were. Everything you see in red has been won by Donald Trump. Everything you see in blue, the East Coast stretch there, has been won by Hillary Clinton. But I'm now going to add in the polls which are the campaign polls going into the election. In other words, how people imagined the other states would colour up. Everything now coloured up is safe blue or safe red. And anything that you see in grey is a battleground state where we've been focusing most of our attention. I go into my calculator and I press the blue pen this time. And we're going to start looking at what sort of things she has to win now. She is short by 70, which is not that much. But we've seen these sorts of places now leaning towards Trump in terms of the races. So let's assume if Michigan is safely blue, that she takes that, and she's now short by 54. What are we left with now? Just have a look at this. Colorado, we saw her in the lead there. Give her that. She's still short by 45. When you go back to the other races, Donald Trump had the lead in Florida. Donald Trump had the lead in North Carolina. Donald Trump had the lead in Virginia. She had the lead in Pennsylvania. We'll give her that one. But she's still short by 25. It doesn't mean she can't do it. She could probably do it very easily with any of these states, with any combination. But she has to actually win some of the ones that at the moment are in play. Let's imagine then, what is it going to be? Nevada, maybe we'll give her that, but that's only 6. Arizona, it's quite unlikely given that it was won by Mitt Romney last time round, but we haven't heard anything about that yet, so let's give her that, another 11. She's short by 8, but at this point, he is actually in the lead with all the rest of the states. So I'm struggling now to choose which one she's most likely to take of those, possibly Virginia. Virginia could come in with a late Democrat surge. Let's give her that. And she's over the line on 275. But we don't know any of those races yet. And as things stand, Donald Trump is still ahead in quite a few of them. It just feels like it's got a little bit trickier.
Yes. Now, Norm, let's just drill down here. Virginia, first of all. He's only 13,500 votes ahead.
Actually, he's now at least officially a little bit behind.
He is a little bit.
He's a little bit behind. She's ahead by a little bit.
So when you drill down into the county results and the precincts, is it still your view that Mrs. Clinton will win Virginia?
She's very likely to win Virginia because while there are still some votes from the rural areas out, most of the votes that are out are Richmond, heavily African-American areas, where the turnout is not as great as it should be, but mostly in the suburbs. But she's not going to win by as much as we had thought. And in Michigan, even though the Detroit Free Press has called it for Mrs. Clinton, nobody else has. And it's clearly closer there. What we're seeing is that we did have this tremendous surge in Hispanic American votes. But there's a big drop-off in African American votes, bigger than people anticipated, and a stronger vote for Trump than a lot of people thought in these suburban areas. And that includes in Michigan, I'm hearing, from women, more than one might have expected.
Well, women voting for Mr. Trump?
Women voting for Mr. Trump in larger numbers than we had thought. Right. So states that should have been more easily won are closer, and that suggests we're in for a longer night.
And let me just put a picture up here, Kathy, while I carry on talking to Norm. Let's just see this picture. There's the Trump family watching the results as they come in. We're just coming up in a moment. It's almost like they've seen a surprise from this picture.
I imagine they are feeling a little bit surprised.
Well, I hope they're enjoying the BBC coverage as they're watching tonight.
Watching us.
Riveting. They are riveted as usual.
Picking up on what Norm was talking about there about women voters, because ABC has also been reporting that in Florida, women have broken for Hillary Clinton, but only by about 51%. That's very close. Now, those numbers may not hold for the rest of the evening, but that was coming out earlier. Ben, I want to get your reaction to where we are at this stage in the race, because it's not where you expected to be, is it?
No, it's a little bit tighter than expected,
and
it's tighter than the polls predicted. I think the upper Midwest is still a big question. I think if Clinton can win Virginia, Colorado, and Nevada and hold Pennsylvania, she's on track to win tonight.
And how's that looking as a prospect?
Well, it looks like Virginia is still very winnable. The early vote was very strong in Nevada for Democrats, record levels. That looks very winnable, and Colorado looks like it's trending her way. So I think the big question mark right now are states like Michigan and Wisconsin, that if we're in for a surprise that favors Donald Trump there, the path for Clinton will be a little bit narrower. But remember, she had more paths to 270, so she can afford to lose a state like Florida that Donald Trump can't.
She can afford to lose a state like Florida, but she can't afford to lose it if it also suggests the way the night is breaking, she's going to lose somewhere like Michigan, potentially lose somewhere. Colorado's looking better, but Pennsylvania, Virginia, Virginia is still very close. Pennsylvania, we're not getting a sense of yet.
And let's not forget North Carolina. I
Right.
mean, that
Neck
looks
and
like
neck.
Yeah, that's neck and neck. So it's quite possible that tonight we may not know. I mean, all of these states can break Hillary Clinton's way, and yet they can also go Donald Trump. We just don't know. And that's part of the, I think Team Clinton must be beside themselves tonight because they never saw a close election night. They figured they would definitely pull ahead, and no one saw Virginia in play. People talked about Michigan, but Virginia's the shocker.
We're going to go to Singapore in a minute to get some more business reaction. Before I do, Norm, Florida, 94% of precincts in. He's still 1 percentage point ahead. You think she can still do Virginia? Can she still do Florida?
Florida's getting harder and harder. Now, the last time we had a number of votes that weren't counted till the next day, and they went more for Barack Obama. And remember, he won by a fairly narrow margin. We still don't know quite how many votes are out in Broward County and in southern Florida.
That's a Fort Lauderdale area? And
Yeah,
so on?
well, yeah, and it's down in Fort Lauderdale and as you move closer to Miami. But, you know, if you keep holding that lead as you move through more and more precincts, you're seeing the possibility slip away.
So you're not so sure?
No, I don't think. I think
more sure about Virginia, not so sure about Florida.
Yeah, I'm more sure about Virginia than I am about Florida. And the pattern in Virginia has been that the votes from Northern Virginia come in late, and there often are Republican leads until later in the evening.
Let's go to Karishma Vaswani, our Asia business correspondent in Singapore. How are the markets reacting so far to this?
Well, it has been a nerve-wracking day here on Asian markets. Initially, they started up a little bit positive, in positive territory, but over the last hour or so, as these results have started trickling in, indicating an early lead, it appears, for Mr. Trump, markets out in Asia have broadly gone negative. Sentiment has really soured here. Most major Asian markets down between 1% to 2%. We've seen a lot of money being piled into what's called safe haven stocks, as well as safe haven currencies. For example, the Japanese yen, which is seen as a safe haven out here in Asia, is rising against the US dollar. And of course, that proxy, the currency that's seen as the big proxy for US election sentiment, the Mexican peso, falling by almost 8% in Asian trade. A lot of traders out here at this trading floor telling me there's a real sense of nervousness and anxiety, something they weren't feeling necessarily at the beginning of the day.
Thank you for that. Mexican peso taking a hit in Far Eastern markets at the prospect of Mr. Trump being the next president. Of course, we don't yet know. The whole thing is still wide open, and we're about to get a whole range of other states closing and perhaps some projections, though I suspect not many, given the way this night has gone, because it's 10 o'clock here on the east coast of the United States. Emily.
Let me just show you the ones that we're expecting in the next few moments. This is the list of them, and we should hear Montana called fairly quickly. We're expecting that to be called for Donald Trump. Let's just see on the dot of 10 o'clock. Here it is. Montana projected for Donald Trump, giving him another 3 electoral college votes. If we scroll through some of the others, let's just see where we get to. This is a particularly interesting one to watch. It's too early to project, but you'll know that there are 3 candidates in this race. Evan McMullin, who is standing as another Republican, as an independent, as a Mormon, as somebody who thinks that Donald Trump hasn't run a very good, virtuous campaign, and he's standing against him. And the polls had him on about 25% share of the vote before we came in, so we'll be watching that closely to see if that isn't firm, solid Republican territory, although on the kind of projections that we're getting from some of the other races, it might be that Donald Trump's having an easier night of it in Utah. Nevada, I would say this is one of the key races to watch. Too early to project, which means that neither side has taken it easily so far. But again, we're at the very beginning of the night for these states coming in this part of the world. It's not till 11 o'clock that you get that slew of safe Democratic seats on the Pacific coast, on the west coast there. So these are the ones we're looking at right now. And as soon as we can update them with any data that comes in, we will do so.
Thanks for that, Emily. There's quite a lot of chatter around now on the TV networks and on social media, bearing out what Norm was saying a few minutes ago, that Mrs. Clinton now looks like she's moving into the lead in Virginia and could indeed clinch it. That, of course, is unconfirmed. We're not projecting it. But even if she does, Catty, it was never meant to be this difficult.
No, it was never meant to be this difficult. And I think what we're seeing, we started out this programme talking about the changing nature of America and demographic groups. We talked a lot about Hispanics because they had voted in such large numbers before this election. And maybe the group that we will end up talking about at the end of this evening is working class white men. And it seems that working-class white voters, actually probably men and women, are almost acting like a minority group and voting as a bloc, and they are voting for Donald Trump. And that's why we're seeing this high turnout in some of these rural and ex-urban areas. Ex-urban is such an odd word. It's the area beyond the suburbs. Anyway, those areas seem to have been turning out for Donald Trump. It's exactly the kind of people that I've spoken to during the course of this campaign, people who feel that the established political system has failed them, who are also aware that America's demographics are changing. I spoke to one, he's called a shock jock. They're these conservative talk radio show hosts down in Southern Virginia. And I remember him had this great phrase, and he said to me, what we are witnessing is what he called the wussification of the American working class male. And what he meant is that these are... Sounds painful and rather emasculating. But he was talking about a group of men who were looking at a world that was not the world their father had, it was not the world their grandfather had, and it was not the world they expected to have. These are men who are having to work 2 jobs, whose wives are going to have to work, and who are seeing their country change around them. And I think what we are seeing in this election, in these results tonight, are those voters saying, look, we have to try and get a better deal. And we believe Donald Trump when he says he's going to give us a better deal because the people we've had in politics so far have failed us.
Right, Catty. Now, Paul Ryan is the Speaker of the House of Representatives. He's a Republican. The House is staying Republican. Whether he stays Speaker, we will find out in the weeks ahead. He's not been best mates with Donald Trump, but this is what he had to say a few minutes ago in Wisconsin.
You know, I way outkicked my coverage. and my better half, Jana. Our kids, my daughter Liza, our boys Charlie and Sam. That's a word, guys. My sister Janet, my brother-in-law Bill, my nephew Mac, my brother Tobin and sister-in-law Oakley are here with us tonight. We have a number of office holders here as well. We have members of the State Assembly and the State Senate. Congratulations on your races. We look forward to hearing from you tonight. Well-deserved races, all of you. Congratulations. You've heard me say this before. I'm a fifth-generation native of this town, Janesville, Wisconsin. I've lived here almost my entire life. I've known most of you for years, if not decades. We have grown up together. We share this community together. It's a great place, in a wonderful state, in the best country God ever created. And I am so eager to get back to work for you, to get on with fixing our country's problems. We have so much potential in this country, so much potential. And if we can just tap it, that's what's ahead of us. You know, by some accounts, I've just been sitting there watching the polls. By some accounts, this could be a really good night for America. This could be a good night for us. Fingers crossed. Like you, I'm eager to watch. There are a lot of races we want to watch. Ron Johnson's race, all the others. There are races we want to watch. So like you, I'm eager to watch the rest of the evening. I'm eager to enjoy this evening with you. So thank you so much for coming out. God bless you all. Appreciate it.
That was
Thank you.
Paul Ryan there. He said it could be a good night for Republicans. Of course, he's not been Donald Trump's biggest fan. I would suggest, given the way the night is going, he's quite subdued.
Well, he's one of these Republicans who's had right from the beginning an incredibly tricky relationship with Donald Trump. And if Donald Trump is elected president tonight, he's going to carry on having a very difficult relationship with him. I mean, I think either way, probably Paul Ryan's days as Speaker of the House, it's not a job he really wanted anyway, are numbered. I can't see him working either very close with... Donald Trump is not somebody who forgets when people have not supported him. And Paul Ryan has not supported him in the way that Donald Trump would want in order to keep him in the House of Representatives in that powerful a position.
Susan, we've talked a lot about how difficult it might be for Mrs. Clinton facing a Republican Congress. But actually, it could be rather difficult for Donald Trump, because if he becomes president, he will do so despite the Republican congressional leadership.
Yes.
So relations will not be that great.
No, it won't. They won't be great. And also the priorities that have to be in place. Donald Trump, first of all, free trade. The Republicans in the House are very much for free trade. The second is entitlement reforms. Donald Trump is offering up an awful lot of spending and not a lot of cuts. And the House will insist on entitlement reforms, which is something he said he will not consider. So that's going to put him at loggernuts just off the get-go.
What do you think about the relations between a possible Trump presidency and even a Republican-controlled Congress?
Well, you know, Donald Trump doesn't agree with Speaker Ryan on a lot. Trade's not the only issue. Right?
Everything.
He campaigned against entitlement reform. He's campaigned against traditional Republican foreign policy. So in some ways, there might be a possibility that Speaker Ryan could get more done with President Clinton in office than with President Trump.
Well, except that the Republicans in the House would never let him get very much done if it was...
OK, let me
President
interrupt you.
Clinton.
Let's go straight to Emily. We've got some breaking news here, Emily.
We've got New Mexico in, which is an interesting one to watch because, as you reminded us, there is the independent candidate Gary Johnson standing as a libertarian here. We didn't know how that could affect the race, but it has been projected for Hillary Clinton, 52% share of the vote with 42% of the precincts in. That gives her another 5 electoral college votes. She'll be pleased with that. We've had another one in as well. The state of Missouri has been projected for Donald Trump. Not a big surprise here, but he'll be very pleased on 62% share of the vote. But with only 13% of the precincts in, that could alter. But it's an emphatic win, or enough of a win, for them to be able to call it pretty early, and it gives him another 10 electoral college votes. So those actual results in. Let's just go back to have a look at the state of the race in a couple of other places. Virginia, we've been watching so closely, haven't we? And we saw an hour or so ago how Trump was taking the lead there. It seems now as if Hillary Clinton is pushing ahead. They're both on 47%. It comes down to a decimal place. But as things stand, she's just edging it. And they've got nearly all of the precincts in now, 47.7%. Obama won the state by 3%. It's looking much tighter as things stand, and there's not much more counting to do. It's looking much tighter for her here in Virginia. Even if they win that, I think they'll get a little bit of a chill about other races that we're looking at, and I want to take you to some of those now. This is where the Clinton campaign should start to be a little bit nervous, I would have thought. Florida, with 99% of the precincts in. Look at that. He does seem to have a 2% lead there. He's on 49.2% share of the vote. That is exceptionally good news for Donald Trump. If Donald Trump manages to take Florida tonight, then a lot more pathways open up in that mathematical process that he needs to get to the White House. New Hampshire, only 4 electoral college votes here, but again, he's opened up a lead here, 48.4% share of the vote. And in North Carolina, where there was so much discussion, it became, I would say, the battleground of the last week or so of the election campaign. He's opened up a lead of 3%. They've got 70% share of the vote in here. Only 41% in New Hampshire, so that's a sort of early bird one. But on these projections, he could have an incredibly good night.
Indeed, Emily. Now, we should remember, Virginia, there are many states Mr. Trump has to win to become the next president. Virginia was not one of them. Indeed, he didn't expect to win it, and it now looks like he isn't going to. But it's not a huge setback for him. Florida is another matter. Florida, he pretty much has to win to stay in the race, and even then it might not be enough. But the latest figures from Florida, 99% of precincts, as Emily was saying, and he's still ahead, not by much, but he's ahead. And as Winston Churchill once said, one vote is enough. And it looks like he may have more than that to win. So at the moment, we can't project Florida, but there's no question that Florida is trending towards Donald Trump with 99% of the precincts in. And that will keep this race very much alive. So what are they saying? What are they thinking? What's the mood at the Clinton headquarters? Let's go to Kim Gattas. Kim, what's it like?
Well, this was not the evening that people here at the Javits Center in New York City were expecting. They were expecting not an easy win, but certainly a happier night. The mood here is very subdued. There have been some cheers about states that are safe democratic states. They also cheered about Pennsylvania, which we're still waiting to hear more about, and Virginia, which some networks are predicting will be won by Mrs. Clinton. But this was really not the night that they were expecting here, and I have to say that the mood is very subdued. We're not getting much reaction from Clinton campaign aides at the moment. They were sounding very confident yesterday, still sounding confident this evening, but as I said, the results that we're seeing come out tonight were not the ones that they were expecting. Well, to discuss this further with me tonight, I have Mary Kay Henry. She's the international president of the Service Employees International Union. This is the largest union in the United States. And Mrs. Henry, thank you for joining us on the BBC. This is not exactly how it was supposed to go, is it?
I think we thought this was going to be tight. This has been a very nasty campaign. I think working families all across this country are very anxious to elect a president that is going to help raise wages and create good jobs. And that's why I'm confident when all is said and done.
You're still confident?
I'm very confident that Hillary Clinton will be our next president.
And where'd you draw that confidence from?
I was in Philadelphia this morning. More people turned out to vote than ever before in the history of the city. I was in Florida this weekend. We heard every family in North Miami had voted early. We saw record numbers of Latino families registering to vote and turning out to vote. So I think in city after city, when these votes end up being counted in these states, Hillary will be the next president.
But it looks like it is going to be a narrow win, which is not the best outcome for her, even if it's better than a loss. How is it possible that someone with her experience, with her background, with her history, is in such a narrow, tight race with Donald Trump, who has offended so many people, but has also appealed to a lot of voters, rural area voters, middle-class white voters? Where has she gone wrong?
I don't think that she's gone wrong. I think that what's happened is that the politics are broken in this country. The economy isn't working for the majority of the nation. And our efforts in the grassroots have been to connect with voters and help them understand that if they turn out and vote, they can elect champions up and down the ballot that are going to actually improve our lives, create good jobs, raise wages, make sure we pass immigration reform, and deal with criminal justice reform. Those are the issues people wanted these candidates to talk about, and they're anxious to get on with an agenda.
But didn't you expect that the Get Out the Vote operation would deliver a better result at this point in the night for her in places like Florida, where she is struggling to keep up with Donald Trump and may lose the state?
Well, when you think about the history of Florida in presidential elections, Florida has always been a tipping state and has always been a state where every vote counts. And that's why we're so proud that 200,000 more people registered to vote in that state. And I think it's heading in our direction. When Broward County is counted, and when the I-4 corridor, where Puerto Ricans have registered in record numbers, I think we'll see a decisive win.
Mary Kay Henry, international president of the largest Union in the United States, still sounding confident, still hoping for some of those big urban centers to deliver for Hillary Clinton. But as we've been saying, this is not exactly how the Clinton campaign was expecting that tonight would unfold, but still a few hours to go.
Indeed, there is. Kim, thank you for that. Your guest there is still confident of a Clinton victory. But some of the pictures we were showing there at the Clinton HQ as you were talking, well, if a picture tells 1,000 words, these 1,000 words are not good for Mrs. Clinton. People looked pretty miserable there. We've got over 50% of the precincts in Georgia, and Mr. Trump is 17 points ahead. Now, Georgia, you would expect to go Republican, but there was a lot of chatter in the media that Georgia could be in play. On that result so far, it's only in play for Donald Trump. And Ohio, he's still way ahead there too. So I think we have to say, without projecting, that the trend in Ohio and Georgia is towards Donald Trump, states that he needed to take to stay in the race. And he is very much in the race tonight. I want to catch up on Florida and then the Senate race. Norm, I'll come to you first. We are pretty close to 100% in Florida. Mr. Trump is still that bit ahead, but we're not able to project it. Why?
Because there are still votes that won't be counted until tomorrow, and there are some votes, some votes out in southern Florida, but it's not looking good for Mrs. Clinton. The lead is not shrunk enough that you could say this is going to change. In the Senate, we have Richard Burr, the Republican senator from North Carolina, who is one of the targets for Democrats, who has now been called a winner by MSNBC and some others. I should note that Fox News called Virginia for Clinton. So
yes, well, it looks like you got that one right.
But what we're seeing, Andrew, is in some ways a nationwide phenomenon, which is in part, you know, what a lot of people had thought, but early research didn't suggest would be the case, that there was something akin to what we used to call the Bradley effect, where we had an African-American popular mayor of Los Angeles who ran for governor, and all the polls said he was going to win handily, and he lost. And the idea was that people didn't want to say to the pollsters that they weren't going to vote for an African-American. In this case, we have a reverse effect. People who didn't want to say to pollsters that they would vote for Donald Trump and who now are doing it. And this is going to shake the polling industry, obviously, not as much as it will shake the country.
But they should have known. We've had shy Tories in Britain.
Yeah.
We've had bashful Brexiteers. And now it looks like we got timid Trumpettes.
Yeah, but we also have
secret Trump voters.
I was going to say, we also probably saw a skew in how the polling sample was. I think we're seeing a very high turnout that people did not expect, especially from working class white folks who people thought maybe they stay at home. So I think that the turnout model was probably more off than anything else.
Which to give the Trump campaign their due, they have said both of these things all along, right? Correct. That the polling was skewed against them and that there were people who didn't want to tell pollsters that they were going to vote for Donald Trump who would actually turn out and do so. Now, look, if this pattern continues during the course of the night, there are also going to be not just pollsters, but a lot of political strategists, people like Ben and people like Susan, who are going to sit back and think, is that get out the vote machine, is the field offices, is the infrastructure of a campaign actually necessary if you have a candidate like Donald Trump who just manages to get an awful lot of free airtime? It's going to shake the political industry. It is an industry in this country.
It's very hard to predict what the likely electorate will look like, and that's why polling is so hard to predict. But what's interesting is that Trump threw the science of politics out the window this election cycle. He ran on a message and a prayer, and part of that is coming home tonight. So there will be a reevaluation.
Absolutely. I want to go back to Jeremy in just a second and get more on Florida that we're still trying to work out. But if this isn't so far been a great night for Mrs. Clinton, it's not been a great night for Senate Democrats either.
No, so now we had the Senate Democrats up 1 earlier with a net up 1 with that Illinois vote, but now that they've lost the North Carolina vote, seat to Burr, the Republican, that is looking tougher for the Democrats now in the Senate. That was an interesting race because there's one issue that we haven't talked about in North Carolina, and it may well be part of the reason that North Carolina is so close. I talked earlier about how America is changing demographically and economically. It's also changing in social, cultural ways. And one of those ways has been the discussion during this campaign of LGBT rights. America moved with lightning speed by the standards of this country on social issues, towards gay marriage. But when I was down in North Carolina about a week ago, people were telling me, look, the whole discussion of gay and lesbian and transgender rights has made a lot of social conservatives uncomfortable. North Carolina became ground zero of that debate, and we may be seeing some of the backlash as well in these more rural conservative communities against a social change that, again, makes some people in America feel this is not the country that their father and their grandfather and their parents knew, and they don't feel quite comfortable
Although
with
it's
it.
amazing because the Democrats months ago were using that as an issue to get early voting down there, to really do the ground troops, to really change, to actually kick out the governor, the current governor. So that is, originally they thought they would have a win because of the issue, and now it's looking exactly the other way.
There's no question that Richard Burr winning in North Carolina is a major setback for Democratic hopes of getting the Senate. All eyes still, though, on Florida. We have the exit poll. Jeremy Vine will give us the details.
Yes, Andrew. Well, it might be echoes of 2000, this, where Florida was just caught for ages in limbo because there was no way of working out whether it had gone to George Bush Jr. or Al Gore. We just highlight it on the map with its 29 juicy electoral college votes. 99% of the votes have been counted. But the reason for the delay is that even with 99% counted, you still can't tell who the winner is in Florida between Clinton and Trump. Yes, it really is going to be between less than 1% margin between those two. And maybe we're about to show how it is that Donald Trump has sprung this Florida surprise, if that's what it is. Just look at the voting history. Florida was unconvinced by Bill Clinton when he was first elected in 1992, which harks back to the older, more Republican character of the state. So you can see it stayed Republican in 1992 despite Clinton's victory. It then went with Clinton in 96 when he was re-elected. And then you've got the two Bush elections, it went Republican. It's a brilliant weather vane state now for election victors, because then it went for Barack Obama both times as well in 2008 and in 2012. And if we just have a look at the map here, as I say, you can basically see what the votes have done. There's a little bit of lack of shading around Miami, although 95% of the votes there have been counted. But you see here this effect where you've got these powerful rural areas which seem to be turning out. I'm going to hand back to Andrew. You've got some news, Andrew.
Trump on 54% share of the vote to Clinton's 42% share of the vote. He has, in other words, on this projection, taken one of those key battleground states, landing him 18 electoral college votes. As I said at the beginning of the night, this is somewhere he has campaigned tirelessly. I've seen him myself on the stump, and those rallies have been energised by the message he was taking to many voters there who are upset by the state of the economy in this Rust Belt state. So here you have it. Ohio has been projected for Donald Trump on 64% of the precincts in. They are confident, in other words, to call it for Donald Trump at this point. And I just want to remind you of the kind of races that we're watching. Ohio's now out of the list. But of these 9, these are all the key battleground states. And let's start with Florida. He is in the lead in all of these. It's too early to project, so we're not going to make any calls. But as things stand on, let's be honest, 99% share of the vote in, he has got a 49% to 47% lead there. OK, that's Florida, where he is ahead. You have seen Ohio already projected for Trump. We'll pass over that and come on to some of the other ones. North Carolina, it's telling us it's too early to project. We will not be calling this, but he has a lead, 50% share of the vote for another 15 electoral college votes. Let's carry on through. Michigan, now we were hearing the Detroit paper saying that it was Clinton's, but as things stand, only 29% of those counted. He is in the lead by 5%. These are all looking rather positive. This is a good night for Donald Trump in terms of the state of the races. New Hampshire, another one. He has a 3% lead here, 45% of the precincts in this one northeastern state that he thinks he might be able to take. And I think we've got one more, Wisconsin, which they never really thought, the Democrats never really thought was in play until this week. When he started going to places like Wisconsin, even Minnesota, Michigan, there were people who were laughing at that. They just thought he didn't have a plan. That was exactly what they were saying. He doesn't have a game plan, doesn't have a campaign plan, he's just going anywhere. Well, maybe he was just going anywhere, but these places are now putting him in the lead as the votes come in so far tonight.
All right. No, I just want to go over to the Trump headquarters, because Mr. Trump hasn't just won Ohio, he's won it big time, a 12-point lead on that latest projection. And in modern times, the way Ohio goes has been the way the country has gone. So let us go over to Laura Trevelyan at the Trump headquarters and get some reaction to this quite stunning victory for Mr. Trump in Ohio. Laura.
It is indeed, Andrew, and you can hear the crowds cheering. And joining me to talk about this Ohio victory and the state of the race is Jerry Falwell Jr., evangelical leader, president of the Liberty University in Virginia. If I can ask you, first of all, your reaction to Ohio.
I think that's huge for the Trump campaign, and it's really encouraging to see the numbers. I'm very optimistic about the results tonight.
And Florida too, looking extremely close, but a slight Trump lead.
It looks like he's holding on to it in Florida. That's absolutely essential, and it's going to go right down to the wire. It's definitely a nail biter.
He's outperforming all of the polls. What do you attribute that to?
I think there are a lot of people who never voted before and who supported Trump, but were never asked by any pollster who they were supporting because they've never been on the radar before. That's just my view.
In the evangelical community, you yourself have taken some heat for supporting him because many Christians have said that he is not necessarily the most moral of people, having been married 3 times, having admitted on a tape to groping women. But do you think the people who are supporting him care?
I don't think he admitted to groping women. I think he said that women would let famous people do that. But
either way, it's not especially Christian.
It's not. Well, but see, that's just the thing. Evangelicals believe that all people are sinners. We're all sinners. We've all done wrong. We all need forgiveness. And Donald Trump, the Donald Trump I know has a big heart. He loves people. He loves this country, and he. I just don't see that. The evangelicals were largely, the vast majority were supporting Trump well before the evangelical leadership was. The divide has only been in the leadership of the evangelical, not the rank and file.
I think that's what we're seeing. Jerry Falwell Jr., thank you so much for joining us here. So that's the view there from a very prominent evangelical leader. And here at Trump headquarters, the mood is buoyant right now.
Thanks, Laura. Some of the other networks are calling Colorado for Hillary Clinton, but I think that was expected. I don't think that will cheer them up too much, particularly given the scale of Mr. Trump's victory in Ohio. Michelle, Mr. Obama won Ohio by 3 percentage points in 2012.
Yes.
On our projections so far, Mr. Trump has won it by 12. That's a 15-point turnaround. It's huge.
It is an enormous turnaround, and I think it speaks a lot to the state of the economy and a lot to the state of people's philosophy and where Mr. Trump said he was going to do the most for America. He has been pro-trade. He's been against trade, but he has talked about bringing steel back, bringing manufacturing jobs back. We see that being a very important issue in states like Ohio, in Pennsylvania, which is obviously a nail biter.
Easier to say than do.
Exactly, much easier to say than do. If Mr. Trump wins, and we are looking at a Trump presidency, the question will be what happens under his presidency in an era of globalization when, in all reality, the chances of manufacturing coming back or even having the type of economy that the United States had 50 years ago, it's just not going to happen.
No, I mean, it's interesting going up to Ohio and words like NAFTA and the World Trade Agreement
Yes.
Organization are dirty words
Yes.
up there. But The other reality of the American economy, as of economies around the world, is that this is a story as much of technology as it is of trade. A lot of people who have lost their jobs in the steel industry have lost their jobs because a robot or a computer chip has taken their jobs.
Yes.
Now, that is not going to change. And how America deals, whether there is a President Trump or whether there is a President Clinton, how America deals with that technological shift is interesting. Norm, I want to get your reaction, though, to Ohio. Of the battleground states, Ohio was not the one that the Clintons had that Hillary Clinton had the most hope of taking, but still, the size of Donald Trump's win in Ohio is
stunning.
extraordinary.
And they didn't expect that they would win Ohio. They thought it would be very close. Yes. But, you know, one of the things we have to say now is we started the evening looking at all the different paths to 270 that the candidates had, with Trump having only a few. Now we're down to Clinton having only a few. That's right. And fundamentally, she has to win the states that were in the bag for her that remain. Michigan, which looks dicey right now. Minnesota, which looks better, although there was an exit poll there that showed it more closer. Colorado we have. Nevada, New Hampshire, which is not looking very good right now either. And if she loses one or two of those, including one or two of the small ones, that's it. Now, beyond that, if she pulls it out, it will be extremely close. And we know that Donald Trump will contest it, and we know we're going to have a long and bitter and difficult period ahead. And we also know now, almost certainly, that the Republicans are going to retain control of the Senate. Just the way things are going, Missouri has gone very substantially for Trump. I doubt very much under those circumstances, given the way the country is going, that Jason Kander, the Democrat, will pull that one out. So we may well have unified Republican government. And then it's going to be interesting because you have a split in the agenda between the congressional Republicans and Donald Trump. And you also have a Republican Party that has built itself around repealing and replacing Obamacare, but does not have a plan to replace. And they're going to have to scramble. And that's going to be, we're going to have a lot of difficulty in this country for months and years ahead.
The other critical thing about this is that if Donald Trump were to win the White House tonight and the Republicans would hold on to the Senate and the House of Representatives, that means a huge amount more of his agenda can get done. And critically, there is a vacant seat on the Supreme Court that he can fill, and then potentially another one as well.
And, you know, Kathy, many people have felt that that is the most important issue with regard to this election.
It often is.
Who is going to be on the Supreme Court, and what will the future of personal rights and civil liberties be in the United States?
Okay, I'm going to interrupt you because I think, Emily, we can call Virginia now.
Virginia has been projected for Hillary Clinton, giving her 48.2% share of the vote to Donald Trump's 46.7%. This was a closer and more tightly fought race than I think her or her campaign team were expecting, but she has clinched it. And as we were talking about, some of the early lead for Donald Trump came from the Republican precincts, the more rural precincts that voted red. And in that last 10, 15%, she has made up the difference. They've got 96% of the precincts in, so it pretty much came down to the last few counts. But she has won. She has taken Virginia, projected for her on 48.2% share of the vote. That's, I'm just working out, it's less than 2%, so she's won it there by a smaller margin than Obama won it by. So
indeed, it tightened rather than...
It has tightened, and this was somewhere, and we've talked about this, and Kathy's talked about the different demographic here, North Virginia becoming richer, the rural parts of Virginia becoming just, you know, a little bit less populated, and yet she has not found this race in Virginia any easier to win than her predecessor 4 years ago, although the Clinton campaign right now will be incredibly relieved just to have that number of electoral college votes safely in.
Well, it keeps the race open. It's a night of ups and downs for more downs for Mrs. Clinton, more ups than we expected from Mr. Trump, but the race isn't over yet. Let's take you outside Times Square, show you what's happening there. The crowds are gathering in even bigger numbers. Our broadcast partner, ABC News, just across the way from us, putting up the results there. As you can see, an exciting time here in the heart of Manhattan as this results programme just begins to gather pace. Let's go and get some more news headlines with Clive Myrie.
Andrew, many thanks. Polls have closed in the last of the key swing states that will determine who becomes the next president of the United States. So far, Donald Trump appears to be performing better than the polls had predicted. Within the last few minutes, it's been announced that Mr. Trump is projected to win Ohio. Laura Bicker has the latest.
Donald Trump is in his campaign headquarters in New York, waiting to see if he has a path to become president of the United States. The big battle was always going to be in Florida. Voters have re-elected Republican Senator Marco Rubio, who ran for president against Donald Trump.
This is an extraordinary place, Florida. It is the collection of all the things that make us the greatest nation on earth, of people who have lived here for decades, of the descendants of slaves, of the children of immigrants. Florida is America, and it's such an honor to be able to represent this extraordinary state.
Decision Day 2016, and the campaign may have been ugly, but voters turned out in their millions. Around 15% of them told pollsters it was their first time. As dusk fell across the East Coast, the lines were still long. Of course, this is America, so in Colorado, you could even stay in the car and vote. A high turnout could be a good sign for the woman who wishes to be the first female president. Hillary Clinton voted near her home in New York, a state she has won.
It is the most humbling feeling, Dan, because, I know how much responsibility goes with this, and so many people are counting on the outcome of this election, what it means for our country, and I'll do the very best I can if I'm fortunate enough to win today.
Just a few miles away, her rival also cast his ballot.
It's looking very good.
As the votes are counted, there were signs of just how bitter, how divisive this campaign has become. At least one couple are no longer talking to one another. Meanwhile, for the candidates, there is a tense evening ahead. As counting gets underway, they can only watch and wait. Laura Bicker, BBC News, Washington.
Iraqi forces say they've retaken the first neighborhood close to the center of the city of Mosul as they continue to battle so-called Islamic State. Our Middle East correspondent Quentin Somerville is one of the first broadcasters to reach the newly recaptured Saddam district on the northeastern side of the city.
With heavy armour and steady caution, Mosul City was breached tonight. Iraqi special forces pushed forward in the dark and under fire. We've just moved about 5 kilometres from the east, right inside Mosul city centre. We're about 3 kilometres from the Nineveh ruins, which really is the heart of this city. As you can hear, this is still a very active area. It's far more dangerous than where we were before. The Islamic State were here this morning.
Quentin Somerville reporting there. Prince Harry has issued a strongly worded statement criticising the media for its treatment of his girlfriend, the American actress Meghan Markle. In the statement, he confirmed the couple have been in a relationship for 2 months, but he says it isn't right that she's been subject to what he called a wave of abuse and harassment, some of it with racial undertones. Here's Nicholas Witchell.
It is a very clear message to the British press: back off.
The story isn't going to go away. And I do think that issuing such statements just encourages those that knew nothing about it to find out about it.
Now, a giant sinkhole has swallowed a 5-lane street in the center of one of Japan's biggest cities. The collapse happened in the middle of the night in Fukuoka City on the southern island of Kyushu. It began with 2 smaller holes that grew steadily until they formed one huge depression around 30 meters wide. That's it. Now it's back to Andrew and Kathy.
It's 20 minutes to 11 here on Times Square, New York time, on election results night 2016. Let's give you an update on the state of the race on the BBC billboard. Our drone camera picks it up over Times Square. 122 Electoral College votes for Mrs. Clinton, 168 for Donald Trump. The winning line is 270, and it is still wide open for either of them to become the next president of the United States. Now, just before we went to the news, before I even do that, we want to go back to Jeremy, find out about Florida, but before we do, Colorado?
For Colorado, it has just been projected for Hillary Clinton, giving her 49% share of the vote to Donald Trump's 44%. This has mostly been Republican since the war, but you'll realise that Obama won it twice. It's got the highest percentage of college graduates in the US, but it's still got 46% working class whites, but it has come good for Hillary Clinton. Colorado then joins the blue tally, 9 electoral college votes. Obama won here by 5%. It looks like she's done pretty much the same sort of thing. And this is how the map looks. Colouring up here in that part of the southwest, Colorado, New Mexico, slightly more of a changing Hispanic demographic might be helping the Democrats here. The rest of the central part of the country, all colouring up for Donald Trump. Look at their tallies. Don't forget they need 270 to win. It's the first person past that post, the magic number of electoral college votes. Clinton is short by 139. She's got 131. Donald Trump is short by 102. He's got 168. He is in the lead at this point, but I'm looking at my watch. In 15 minutes, we will get these states closing at 11 o'clock, which should automatically add on at least 70 or so electoral college votes, pushing her tally up. But there are a lot of undecided races, which are the ones we keep coming back to here.
It's clear, Cathy, when you see Virginia is very tight for Mrs. Clinton. Colorado, she does pretty much on track, what was expected. There is, as yet, no consistency coming out of these results.
No, I mean, that's what's interesting, because Colorado, she's doing well, presumably from those urban growing areas like Denver and Boulder, Colorado. We've got a growing Hispanic population in Colorado as well. We've got an affluent urban and suburban population in Colorado, exactly the same as Virginia. So what's the difference between what's happening in Virginia? It's possibly that the difference is in the southwest corner of Virginia. You can see the little bit of Virginia that sticks out there, which is coal country, working class manufacturing country. The coal country really, one of the biggest policy differences between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump has been on the issue of fossil fuels. He says full steam ahead with coal, with oil and with gas exploration. She wants to make American houses dependent on renewable fuels. It's a big difference between them. And the military bases, Colorado has a military base though too. So it's puzzling to me how this is shaping out. And the only thing we can think is that we've had an uptick in performance in those ex-urban and rural areas where people really feel that Donald Trump is the only one who is going to manage to make their world stop getting worse.
Here's the bottom line, Andrew. Trump bet on using racial resentment and economic populism to get white working class Americans who make up 40% or more of the electorate. And it turns out they voted like a bloc, like a minority group almost. And that, along with the fact that our politics are so tribal, driven by the negative partisanship that you mentioned, where Republicans who otherwise were appalled by Trump were still going to go along with him, is what's making the difference here. And none of us saw that coming in the same way. And I don't think even the Trump people did.
But here's where I disagree with you on that. It's not just racial resentment. I mean, that's not the entire
and
thing
economic
behind
populism.
Trump. It's the economic populism I
Sure.
think is more important here. You've had promise after promise, year after year being made to folks that we're going to get this economy turned around, we're going to have more job creation and economic growth, and we haven't seen that. And that's what I think that the pollsters have not really been able to gauge is the
Well, there's been quite a
level
lot of job creation. The unemployment rate's 4.9%.
Well, you still have 94 million people out of the workforce than when Obama started as president. You have millions more on welfare. But I think the point is that people around the country are looking at this and saying, I don't want the establishment anymore. I want to change.
Well, and we also have a large number of people who are underemployed, and again, I think I've said it since day one, and I've coming to see it come to fruition tonight. Just as Norm just said, we saw a large block of white males vote as a minority group, and quite actually will be a minority group in the United States very soon in the future.
All right, I'm going to interrupt you because we need to go back to Jeremy Vine. He was telling us all about the Florida exit poll. It's such a key state. We need to hear from him again. Jeremy.
I never mind being interrupted by the result from Ohio. I've got to tell you that. My goodness, that was sensational. And I shall come to Ohio in just a moment. But we've got a chance, haven't we, to look at why people have voted the way they have. And we mentioned that Florida was reliably Republican. It went Republican in 92, and then it started to switch and go with the candidate who won. So it's an awful lot at stake, not just those 29 electoral college votes, but whoever takes this state, bellwether status suggests that they may be set fair for the White House. Now, there's probably only 1% in it. The narrative with Florida wasn't it, that yes, Trump would get his rural voters out and so on, angry and older white voters. But in the cities around Miami, in places like Orlando and Tampa, then lots of minority voters and so on would come out for Hillary Clinton. It hasn't worked out quite that way, according to the exit poll. And let me show you exactly what I mean. So we just come to the wall here, and let me just bring on particular areas in Florida and have a look at how they voted. So we firstly look at urban places. How did they vote? And the answer is that, as expected, 55% went for Clinton and 41% of voters in these urban areas went for Trump. So far, that's pretty much as we expected. And actually, if we go way outside the urban areas, we go to rural areas. Let's have a look here. So this is rural voting now, and overwhelmingly going for Donald Trump, 63%, 35% for Hillary Clinton. What's fascinating is the third one. This is in Florida, remember. Now, these are the suburbs. How did the suburbs in Florida go? They were supposed to go for Clinton. That was the whole narrative that was building up. They didn't. They went for Donald Trump by quite a margin. So this idea that this is all him just supercharging rural voters and they all march into the polling stations, not so. He's getting closer to the cities with his support, at least in Florida. Let me clear this down, and we'll take a look, if we can, at Ohio as well. Now, Ohio has now been called for Trump, and you can see really how important that is to him, because the last time it went Republican, the winner in that state, George Bush Jr., became president. So we'll look at sex and race in Ohio, white men in Ohio, gender, I should say, shouldn't I, to avoid any confusion. So this is how white men, actually, can we track it back to white men? Here we go. So let's start with white men here. And this is how they voted in Ohio. 30% Democrat, 63% Republican. Isn't that remarkable to see Trump with that kind of lead? More than 30% among white men in Ohio, who, by the way, are the vast majority, white voters, the vast majority in Ohio. Much less of an issue with minority voters in Ohio for the Republican Party. Now we look at white women. And isn't this also fascinating? Again, the narrative was, well, women will go for Clinton. But actually, in this election, white women in Ohio, in some states, they may not have done. They haven't in Ohio. Trump won among white women in Ohio by 51% to 43%. Some really interesting figures there, I think, Andrew, for you to chew over.
Yeah, very interesting that. I mean, it's the figure
the
of the women's figure. Let's go down to Florida now, to Regina, who's in Miami, Florida, with us. Regina, I imagine that those people in southern Florida, the Democrats down there, which is that stronghold, the Democratic stronghold is down in Miami, they're feeling a bit nervous at the moment, aren't they?
Yes, I spoke to a senior aide for the Clinton campaign here in Florida a couple of hours ago, and she said you need to wait for Broward, you need to wait for Palm Beach County before you can really see what's going to happen in Florida. But really, as we've seen in the results that have come in so far, Donald Trump still has his lead. It's interesting that Gary Johnson has about 2 percentage points, which is more than the difference between the two candidates as well. And one thing that I was looking at in some of the early indications was that the white evangelical vote, although the percentage of the white evangelical vote overall has gone down, about 85% or 81% of white evangelicals have gone for Donald Trump. Now, I'm joined by two guests, Catty. Both are Republicans. Pastor Robert Warren, thanks for joining us, and Frank Carrasco. Now, let's start with you, Pastor Warren. It could be that the white evangelical vote in Florida just outweighed the minority vote, which the Democrats have been banking on.
Well, I think the Republicans have had to bank a lot on the platform of the Republican Party. Not only Mr. Trump, but the platform. And the platform stands for many things that we feel are strong in the Christian faith, such as abortion and, in leadership when it comes to the Supreme Court. So we have I think when it came down to it, we had to make a decision on who we would vote for based upon what the Word of God teaches us to stand in. So that's what we've done.
Let's bring in Frank. Frank, you're a Republican. Can you tell us who you voted for?
Yeah, this is my first election where I've actually voted for the Democrat. I voted for all the other Republican candidates, except that I voted for Hillary Clinton for president. Donald Trump is completely illegitimate as a candidate. He has no political experience. We don't know what his positions actually are or what he's actually going to accomplish in office. We know that whatever he does, I cannot in good faith foist him upon the world.
Now, I met some Republicans throughout the country, but also here in Florida in my reporting, who felt the same as you, but when push came to shove, they couldn't bring themselves to vote for a Democrat. And it seems that many of those might have done the same here in Florida and not gone for Hillary Clinton, but in the end thought, I'll stick with a Republican.
I had a hard time. I went down the ballot, and when I got to the president candidates, I stopped for a second. I said, I'm going to vote for the other candidates first before I went back to the president candidates, and I had to vote Hillary Clinton. I could not, if Donald Trump wins this, I couldn't know that I had any hand in it. I couldn't rest at night with knowing that.
What do you think this tells us about Florida and conservative values that the pastor was talking about?
I think a lot of it is a protest vote. We are, as a nation and as a state, really upset at the establishment, Republicans who have let us down on a lot of occasions, as well as the Democrats. And Hillary Clinton does represent a lot of the establishment. And so, similar to maybe what happened in the UK with Brexit, a lot of this is a protest vote.
Okay, thanks very much, Frank Kurusko, and thank you very much, Pastor. You think your man's going to do it tonight?
Well, I'm sure hoping so.
Okay, well, we'll find out.
Yes.
So it's interesting there that two Republicans with two very different views on the presidential candidates. But if Donald Trump does indeed win here in the state of Florida, it could be because people like the pastor here and his congregation came out in great numbers.
Okay, Regina Vaidyanathan down there in Miami for us with a couple of her male guests. Let's talk a little bit more about how women are voting in the course of this election. Claire Shipman is a surrogate with the Clinton campaign. She's in our Washington bureau at the moment. Claire, this isn't the way I imagine you expected this night to go.
No, not so far. I mean, obviously, when you talk to the Clinton campaign now, they're still looking at all the multiple paths to victory, but I think they had hoped to have it locked up by now.
You've spent the last few months traveling around the country talking to women voters, trying to rally female support for Hillary Clinton. But actually, when you're looking at these numbers, these exit polls returns from a state like Florida, it looks like she hasn't done that well with women there.
Well, it's interesting when you look at the breakdown, and I was listening to your analysis earlier about the white female vote in Ohio, and I would be curious to see that broken down into the college-educated and not college-educated, because what we've seen so far is that she's had a fairly commanding lead among college-educated voters and even white college-educated voters and certainly minority voters, but the white non-college-educated voters have been really much more Trump supporters, and I'm not sure what that breakdown looks like in Ohio yet. But you know, there's no question that women are and have been her natural base, and women will be the reason ultimately she wins. We're certainly hoping, but I think that it's also the case that it has been really a struggle for her at some points to ignite that base. There's been the likability factor for her. She's been accused of not being inspirational, but I think we've seen as this campaign has gone on that there have been key moments where she's really started to resonate both with voters my age, but also younger women. For the convention, for example, as people finally started to let that stereotype fall away that has been in place for 20 years and really understand what she's done in public life. And I think that they are hoping, and certainly we're all hoping, that women will be the reason she's going to win.
But that doesn't seem to be the case tonight. I mean, even if you look not just at the Electoral College vote, but you look at the popular vote, and I think we've got the numbers, we can put them up now, with 54% of the precincts in, Donald Trump is still ahead, 49% to 47% in the popular vote as well. I mean, I imagine in your conversations tonight with the Clinton campaign, this is just not what they wanted.
No, in the past, look, they're looking at Michigan and Wisconsin and New Hampshire. Obviously, Florida would be nice. I think Minnesota, Nevada. I mean, these are all key states that obviously the campaign knows that that they need to win. But I think that, again, they're hoping, and you just heard your reporter talking about Broward County. Look, they're watching all of this as closely as you are, and it's certainly, again, not where they expect it to be right now at this moment.
Okay, Claire Shipman, a surrogate for the Clinton campaign. Claire, thanks very much for joining us.
Well, we are only about 5 minutes away from polls closing in the West Coast, that huge avalanche of Clinton support she can expect from California through Oregon into Washington. And we had thought, or many people had thought, that at this stage, as the Western support for Mrs. Clinton moved into her column, that would take her over the 270 mark. But in fact, no matter how well she does out there, it is still not going to do that. And we've only got 4 minutes to go, Emily. It won't do it, will it?
It won't. We began the night talking about what a difficult path it was for Donald Trump to carve himself to get to the White House. And now we're starting to ask it from the other perspective. Clinton is on 131. She is still short by 139. In other words, even if all this West Coast came in for her, she still wouldn't quite be up to that mark of 270. So what is her path to the White House, given the kind of races that he now appears to be ahead in? This is how the map has coloured up so far. Everything in blue is hers. Everything that is in grey has not given us a result so far. We're going to add in, as we did last time round, the campaign polls. This is not voting, this is how the campaign polls decreed or guessed that the safe states would settle. Now you can see she's got much more blue on the map. She's up to 222, but she's still short by 48. And this is where it gets quite difficult, because we've already said that Florida, where Trump is ahead, might go for him. And we've said that North Carolina, where he's currently ahead, might go for him. And we've said that Arizona, where he's also looking to be ahead, might go for him. So at this point, if those ones, we're still waiting for results from those places, but suddenly Trump is short by 17. That is very little indeed. Let me take the blue button now and show you what she has to do. She has to take Iowa, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. She has to take some combination, probably. Let's give her Pennsylvania, which is 20. She's still short by 28, so she probably has to take Wisconsin and Michigan and Nevada, Michigan and Iowa together. So she has to get, of these battleground states, more than she did at the beginning. Suddenly, we're asking the question the completely other way around, and we're saying, well, if he's actually ahead in these places that we thought she would take quite easily, becomes a bit tougher right now.
And Andrew, we should say that Politico, which is the big political website, is now calling Florida for Donald Trump. Now that's Politico. We haven't got it from...
and some others are too. We're not quite ready
to project
Florida yet.
We're not quite ready, but it's
yet,
not looking good.
No one can say it isn't going that way. Let's go over to Clinton headquarters and John Sopel. John, tell us the mood there now.
The city of Detroit now may be the funereal, disappointed, dismayed, disbelieving, and actually I would say that some people have already started to drift away into the New York night. The party that they had anticipated has not materialized, and I think you're seeing an awful lot of people kind of just looking at the way things are going and looking at the picture of the map as it stands and thinking it's not going to be. And, you know, an incredible feeling for Democrats who thought, fighting Donald Trump, how could they possibly lose? Maybe the same sort of feeling that the politicians who called the referendum on Brexit in the UK had, that they thought they wouldn't lose. But there is clearly a feeling with conventional politics that it is failing to deliver for enough people that it should do, and this is the response that someone who comes along as an outsider and says, I'm going to shake it up. Whatever the flaws they may have had in their personality is resonating more than a Hillary Clinton who has been a conventional politician for 3 decades.
John, throughout this campaign, we have talked about how few routes Mr. Trump has to the White House. I think we're now beginning to look at how few routes Mrs. Clinton has to the White House.
I think exactly as Emily said, I think the boot is now on the other foot. We're now looking at what would Hillary Clinton have to do to win, and her paths seem to be narrowing. As you see the way the votes in other states have unfolded, that she really has to do very well now. Well, there's a big cheer going up. I'm not sure what that's for, but I think that people are cheering to keep their spirits up, because I think they know overwhelmingly that this is not going
I think, John,
in the
California
right direction.
has come in. California has come in for Hillary Clinton, which is not exactly a surprise. But nevertheless,
It's making them happy.
It's the biggest state in the union. So if you've won it, why wouldn't you cheer?
But there was never any prospect that she wasn't going to win California. It's what's happening in the Midwest that is of much more concern. People thought that Donald Trump, what are you doing going to Michigan and Wisconsin? Well, we're now waiting and we're seeing why he went there, because that does look like very promising territory for him.
All right. John, thanks for that. Our North American editor, John Sopel, there at the Clinton campaign headquarters, just came into life for the first time in a while as California was announced. Let's get the details from Emily.
The point of that cheer, I think, was bigger than California. This has put Hillary Clinton into the lead for the first time in quite a while. And for people watching the screens in those big parties, just to see your candidate now come alive, come ahead in this race, I think is a big moment, and it will be a relief, even if it's a temporary relief. Clinton is now short by 80 Electoral College votes. Donald Trump on 172 is short by 98. So he now has the higher mountain to climb based on the states that have actually been called tonight. He's just added Idaho to his tally. Hillary Clinton has added California and Hawaii to her tally. So it takes her a little bit closer, but she's still short by 80. And as we showed you before, apart from Washington and Oregon, which are more likely to settle in the blue camp when they come in, a lot of these other ones, Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, Michigan and Wisconsin even, those seem to be putting Donald Trump in the lead. If you start taking those out, she's got much narrower chances of getting to the White House. But at this point, as everyone in the hall realised, she's now ahead. It's a good tally if you're a Democrat tonight.
Well, they should enjoy that for the moment, because she may not be ahead for much longer. Here's a dramatic development. It's just a projection. But it's a projection from the New York Times, the bastion, the home of liberal journalism in the United States, an incredible supporter for the Democrats and for Mrs. Clinton. They're now saying that Donald Trump has a 95% chance of being the next president of the United States. Norm?
Well, actually, they have this crazy sort of dial thing. If you look on the web itself, the person who's running it says there's a 66% chance that Clinton wins the popular vote and Trump wins the Electoral College. So I'm not sure I would take the upshot at this point with what they've got on their website too seriously.
Well, we were taking the upshot seriously earlier when it showed Mrs. Clinton winning.
No, and 538.com, which is the one website that said this is much more volatile and gave her less of a chance of winning, has it much closer to even. But I think we need to point out that in Pennsylvania, a state that was almost a sure thing for her is not a sure thing. Mm-hmm. She's won by a big margin in Philadelphia, as you would expect. The numbers from the rural areas coming in are, as we've seen in other places, stronger. Wisconsin, we know that the results are pretty much in from Milwaukee, which is a Democratic stronghold, and she's going to struggle to win Wisconsin. If she loses Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, which is a real possibility now, then she loses the White House. And right now, she's got to win 3 states that are in toss-up category and don't look great for her.
Okay, so that's just the thing, Katia. Stand back a little bit at the moment and see where we're going here. If the New York Times is right, it's no more certain to be right than many others. But first of all, Donald Trump did a hostile takeover of the Republican Party. and won the nomination against what most mainstream opinion thought was impossible. He'd be gone by New Hampshire and go back to making his reality TV shows or whatever. Now, at the very least, he is a small way away from really dissing the whole political establishment in the United States and the media establishment.
And pollsters and strategists and everybody that has commented on American politics for far, far longer than I have. This would be the upset of American political history. If somebody comes into office who has never held political office, made his name as a reality television star, and has frankly not actually offered very many in-depth proposals, has alienated some of America's key allies around the world. And if he still wins, given all of that, I think it is, as much as anything, two things: a reflection of Hillary Clinton and how much, and we've discussed this, how much she is disliked as a candidate, and a reflection of an anti-establishment mood that we are seeing not just here, but that we are seeing in other countries as well. Let's go to Emily, though, because Emily, you've got breaking news on another critical battleground state.
North Carolina has, in the last few seconds, just been called for Donald Trump, projected for Donald Trump, we must say, on 51% share of the vote to Hillary Clinton's 46% share of the vote. They have got 92% of the precincts in. This is a very interesting state. This was won once by Obama, then taken back, as it were, for the Republicans by Romney. And Donald Trump will be very pleased to hold on to this in his red states category here. 51% share of the vote for Donald Trump, giving him 15 electoral college votes. That is really what his campaign needs right now. It's a big fillip. If he can take North Carolina and Florida, which, as Catty was saying, some networks are already projecting for Donald Trump, then suddenly that whole pathway becomes much, much easier. There were lots of questions about North Carolina, whether they'd allow the votes to be open, the polling stations to be open for enough days to allow some of the African-American vote to come forward and vote in early voting. It's been the focal point of a lot of racial tension as well. And it's a changing demographic, younger, more educated, more mixed. And yet, on a night like tonight, Donald Trump has managed to hang on to it for the Republican Party. This outsider has taken this state and kept it red. That will be a real triumph for him tonight, I think.
Well, North Carolina result is clearly very significant. The biggest presidential race upset in modern American politics was in 1948. You have to go that far back when Harry Truman was thought to have no chance of being re-elected against Thomas Dewey, but he won. And all of the media establishment and the political establishment thought he had no chance. The Chicago Tribune even printed a famous front page saying, "Dewey wins." That's the biggest ever, until tonight, if Donald Trump wins. That'll then be the biggest ever upset in American presidential politics. So there they are down in Times Square, just below where we are broadcasting to you tonight. Oh, sorry, that's not Times Square. I wondered, because it's New York. And I was slightly worried, not worried, but wondering why they were cheering in New York, given the way it's gone. But of course, it's the Trump headquarters, and therefore it is no surprise that they are cheering. I suspect that they are now beginning to think that they have victory within their grasp. Ron.
No question about it. When we started tonight, we said that the path was so narrow for Donald Trump. And of course, as Emily's just told us, the path for her is so narrow. North Carolina was huge. And I think this is a reflection of the social evangelicals coming out and saying, we're upset by a lot of the things that Washington has been doing. We're upset about the transgender bathroom issue here. Now, looking at Donald Trump's path, he's got a chance to win in Iowa. He's got a chance to win in New Hampshire. The path for her is getting smaller and smaller, Andrew. And I'm starting to get the feeling that if I was in Team Clinton camp, I'd be rather concerned.
What do you say?
Well, you know, I think one of the things that is so interesting is that in every presidential election in the United States, we always say that it is the women's vote that elects the United States president. And we have assumed that Hillary Clinton was going to get the vast majority of the votes of American women. But we have also seen this this division within American politics between what we call red state feminism and blue state feminism, and some of the hatred that we see, I believe, towards Hillary Clinton on the part of some American women who live in red states are people who feel that American feminism has left them behind, do not respect the decision to, for example, to stay at home, to maybe homeschool your children, and feel left behind by that movement. And a large number of those women supported Sarah Palin, and I believe will support Donald Trump simply because of that one issue. They feel left behind.
Let me make a broader point, Andrew. The exit poll showed that 61% of the people who voted didn't think Donald Trump was qualified to be president. And I think this is a phenomenon that we have to look at globally. People who didn't think he was qualified to be president voted for him. Yes. A sign of a deeper discontent and a backlash against the establishment and the status quo and the leadership. And as we look ahead to Italy, to France, to Germany possibly, to a lot of other countries that are going to be facing leadership challenges, this, not only the fact that they're going to have to deal with maybe Newt Gingrich as Secretary of State, but the fact that they're going to have their own troubles. There will be chills going up and down the spines of leaders in a lot of countries.
But you know, Hungary elects a pretty hard right government. Yeah. It doesn't matter that much outside Hungary. Greece elects a Marxist government. It's interesting, significant in its way, but doesn't matter that much outside Greece. When the United States of America, with all its important alliances around the world and its economic clout in the world and its significance, elects a really non-mainstream politician, that is significant beyond belief.
And of course, the thing about Donald Trump is that he's not really hard right or hard left. I mean, you could make a very cogent argument that we have in this election 2 New York Democrats running, were it not for some of the things, the nativist things he has said about immigrants. Let's go out to Ohio, though, because we've been talking a lot about the Midwestern states and whether Hillary Clinton can hang on to that blue wall that is protecting her and giving her still a chance to win the presidency. And it's looking very shaky, that wall at the moment. Of course, we saw the first stones from it crumble in Ohio. Barbara Plett-Usher is there in Cleveland for us. What are they saying up in Cleveland, Barbara?
Well, there was always a chance that Donald Trump would take Ohio, quite a good chance, but the margin by which he's taken, I think, has got quite a few people surprised. I've got a Democrat and a Republican here to respond to that. Tom Kelling, you voted for Mrs. Clinton. How do you feel about the 12 points by which Mr. Trump won?
I'm pretty shocked, coming from a area of unions and stuff like that, to have that big of a margin. It's pretty impressive.
Because the unions were officially backing Mrs. Clinton, weren't they?
Yes, they were. Yeah.
Perhaps the members weren't, though.
Obviously, there were some that weren't, yes.
Probably quite a few. Larry Cahill, you voted for Mr. Trump. How do you feel about his margin of winning? Were you expecting that?
I expected a single-digit win, 7-8 point win. I was absolutely confident he would win because, all due respect to my friend Tom, I'm so encouraged by my fellow Ohioans that they let common sense and logic win out. Can't trust somebody that's been there 30 years and hasn't done anything for 30 years for others. I think they realized a change by someone who's a problem solver, and it's a unifying message that goes beyond Republican, Democrat.
But what's going on here, do you think? Is this Democrat versus Republican, liberal versus conservative?
I don't think so. I think it's very different. I think it's become something where it's not Republican versus Democrat, because really Donald Trump is very liberal.
But what is it then?
I think it's classes of people that have decided there's a silent group here, middle-class people, a lot of urban people, a lot of rural people who have no voice. And I think he's speaking in plain terms for them, not in legalese, not in elitist terms, but in very plain language that people understand and it connects.
A lot of economic pain, you think this reflects, Tom? I mean, you struggled yourself about whether to support Mrs. Clinton.
Yes, definitely. Definitely, the way the area's been here, it's been down drastically, and I believe possibly that's why a lot of the union members and just people in general went with Mr. Trump, mainly because he's a businessman. He's saying he's going to bring business back, things like that. So possibly that's why people went with him.
But you didn't in the end. Why was that?
I honestly don't believe that he's going to bring those businesses back. This is a man that has businesses out of this country. Why aren't they here? Why isn't he supporting and giving these people in America jobs? His businesses are giving other people jobs for obviously less money and hurting us. So.
Well,
that's a piece of his. That's a piece of his empire. He's a global businessman. I'm a native New Yorker. I saw how he helped revitalize New York City, made it safe with Rudy Giuliani and development that he did there. That's why people choose to visit New York City and not necessarily Baltimore or Detroit. It's a little different community. Trump was a developer. He hires people. He's a problem solver.
Well, we'll
Not
see
a
if people will
politician.
be choosing to visit Ohio, choosing to visit Cleveland after this win. We
hope so.
The thing that's interesting is that Ohio has always chosen the president since 1964, so we'll see shortly, I think, whether it has done again.
Barbara, thanks for that. An increasing number of media outlets are now calling Florida or projecting Florida for Donald Trump. We're not quite ready to do that, but I think it's pretty clear the way things are going. The next state that attention will be turned to will be Pennsylvania, where things are not going very well for Hillary Clinton in Pennsylvania either. So let's go over to Laura Trevelyan. She's at Trump HQ. I should imagine things are going pretty strong there. Laura?
These are two deeply flawed individuals.
Yes, Andrew, and Fox News behind me has called Florida, North Carolina and Ohio, projected that Trump is winning in all three. And joining me now is Todd Phelps. Todd is a Republican from Texas, ran for Congress. Todd, tell me, when we just looked at that board now, Donald Trump is up in the Electoral College, he's up in the popular vote. What's happening?
Well, it's people that have been ignored are speaking. That's what's happening. People that the establishment class has pushed to the side, people that want $30 and $50 an hour inner city jobs might even be speaking, because that's been decimated, and his trade argument is well founded.
Are we about to see the same country, although it's a changing country, that elected Barack Obama, elect Donald Trump?
I believe so. I think it's headed in that direction, and I think that both Barack Obama and Donald Trump are passionate about what they believe in, and people sense that. They sense the genuine aspect of Donald Trump. You know, the media can pile on and take sound bites to try to paint him in a negative light. But I don't believe what the media says, or I wouldn't be here. I trust the man.
But for those people of Mexican heritage, and he has called some Mexicans criminals, rapists, he's talked about building a wall. For those people who might be frightened by what he represents, what would you say?
I think that's media spin. I think that the way he came across was misinterpreted. I think he cares about the people of Mexico. I think that that's why he went and met with the president. I think that he understands Anglo populations, any population around the world is going to have some folks that do bad things. I don't think that that paints a light on what he thinks about people of Latin American culture. And being the person that has spent a lot of time in Mexico, driven over the border, spent a lot of time in Arizona where there's a federal sign that says don't drive over it. And my good friend that I lived with, who was a Mexican national, said don't drive over it. It's not a blanket statement. They want to paint it as a blanket statement. And he has more Latino support as well that the media doesn't want to reflect.
How do you rate his chances in the upper Midwestern states, which now could be his route to the presidency, to Michigan, to Wisconsin? If he can flip one of those, he could be there.
Well, I haven't been glued to the TV because I've been speaking with some folks, but I believe he's rocking it. I think that what we're seeing, we saw two of the states that the pollster Frank Luntz said he had to have in order for his pathway go in his favor. So to me, I particularly trust that guy, and so I'm feeling good. I'm feeling extremely good.
How do you explain the fact that in all three of the debates, Donald Trump didn't necessarily seem to be as well informed as Hillary Clinton, to have as many answers as she did, and yet he so far tonight is coming out ahead? Do people want a different kind of leader?
They don't want a lifelong politician. And if he was a lifelong politician, he would know every vice president of every country. He probably doesn't. and Hillary probably comes close to knowing that. There's probably a few she doesn't. But I think it's a referendum on, they want someone real. Lifelong politicians are in their bubble. They're not listening. And that's exactly why I got in Austin, because municipally, they weren't listening. And then they said, hey, why don't you run for Congress? And I enjoy the outcome there. But back to your question, it's about people wanting to feel like they're heard.
Well, they're certainly being heard tonight. Todd Phelps, thank you so much for joining us. That's Todd Phelps there of Texas. So you can hear the chant behind me, USA, USA. People here at Trump headquarters started the night thinking that they were going to lose, and now they believe that the White House is within their grasp.
Thanks, Laura. Now, some of the Trump supporters we had hoped to speak to tonight, having round our table, we can't get them yet because they don't want to leave that party where Laura is. In a sense, who can blame them? What is happening tonight, of course, is being watched with fascination by every government around the world, but none more so than the British government. The British government knows almost nothing about Donald Trump. It knew almost everything about Hillary Clinton, so they'll have to become fast learners. But Mr. Trump has said when it comes to free trade deals, Britain will be at the top of the queue rather than the back of the queue, as Mr. Obama said. And with a Republican Senate and a Republican House, then maybe a free trade deal will be something that will come on the British government's agenda rather quickly, because there will be a friendly audience for them in Washington. Let's get more results, Emily.
We've just had Oregon in the last few moments. It's been projected for Hillary Clinton. Not a big surprise here. It hasn't voted Republican since Reagan, but every little bit counts at this stage in the game. 54% share of the vote for Clinton to Donald Trump's 40%. So an emphatic win in Oregon, but as I say, not a state that will come as any particular surprise. It was pretty much factored into those West Coast wins. These are the battlegrounds, though, that we're still watching, and this is where the race starts to get interesting. In Florida, you can see Donald Trump is ahead. 99% share of the vote, and 99% of the precincts in, and he's on 49% share of the vote. Some networks are calling this for him already. Do not expect this to go easily because it was so tightly fought over those hanging chads in 2000. So we might have to wait till the bitter end to get a result from Florida. But you can see he is projected ahead. Michigan also has Donald Trump ahead on 47.8. Wisconsin, right next door, has got him 49% share of the vote. You can see if you start to add in the tallies here, 29 plus 16 plus 10 electoral college votes, then he starts to look like he's got a real pathway. This is the map as it's coloured up with actual states as they've come in. I'm going to add in the polls, and this is how they've decreed the safer states will fall. And right now, we're going to play with the calculator button. And I'm going to give him, imagine that he's taken those states in which he's ahead. Florida was the first one. Michigan was the second one. Wisconsin was the third one. He's now short by 2, which means, in essence, if he just picks up either New Hampshire or Iowa or any of the bigger ones, he's done it. Look what happens if he takes New Hampshire on that tally. He's crossed the line, not by a lot, but it doesn't have to be by a lot. He's done it. 272, just based on what he's got, on the projections where he's ahead, and on one other state where he's also ahead, New Hampshire. Suddenly, it all looks much more possible than it did at the beginning of the night.
What a change compared to when we started, when it was the difficulty of Mr. Trump becoming president. Now it's the difficulty of Mrs. Clinton. But Norm, if Mrs. Clinton was to hold on to Michigan, if she was to win that, isn't she still in contention?
She wins Michigan, but she's going to have to win Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. And she's going to have to win 3 states that now look pretty grim for her. Of the states that Emily picked for Mr. Trump...
As you talk, I'm filling them in so that our viewers can just do the tally.
Yes.
What was the other one you said?
So Pennsylvania, Michigan, put in Wisconsin for her.
Yeah.
And she will win Minnesota and Washington.
She's ahead in Minnesota.
And Nevada. So if she does those, she's on a path. But there's a twist here that we need to remember, which is that we have at least one elector for Mrs. Clinton in Washington and a second one who has hinted at it, who said they won't vote for her. So if she got 271 and the 2 did not vote for her, then she still doesn't become president. So she has this very narrow path. And the other states that have not been called, Arizona and Iowa, at this point look very, very strong for Mr. Trump. So she has basically one path to victory, and he has many others, and that's a total change.
No, would you be looking at a tie at this point? I mean, that is conceivable on this basis, right?
It's possible only with a faithless elector at this point, because she did the good news for her in Nebraska. She won the one district, so she got that one electoral vote.
Norm, is the story here Democrats and Hillary Clinton specifically neglecting those Rust Belt states? She did not visit Wisconsin once after the Democratic primary, and she only went twice between the spring and last Friday to Michigan. She hasn't been there. She hasn't paid her dues there. And it's reflective, perhaps, of a bigger issue, which is the Democrats taking those states, largely white states, working class white states, for granted.
There's certainly some truth to that, but it's also that she didn't expect a wave of this sort. She did spend a lot of time in Pennsylvania, which now is giving her trouble. You know, there's another interesting phenomenon here. Trump and the Republican Party spent very little money on sophisticated get-out-the-vote efforts. Mrs. Clinton had the most sophisticated and expensive get-out-the-vote effort and vote targeting effort we have ever seen. And it really shows that those things only take you so far. He had a motivation for voters that didn't require finding them and getting them out there. They were there, even many of them not thinking he was qualified to be president, because by God, they wanted to make a stand. And that really is a new minority group that is dominating our politics.
All right. Fox News is reporting that Canada's immigration website has crashed. And that's, I'm getting that from Carl Bildt, who used to be Prime Minister of Sweden. So I'm taking it quite seriously. More, Emily.
We've got Utah, and it has been projected for Trump. There was some question mark over whether Evan McMullin, the CIA spy, the Mormon who lives in Utah, might be able to take this for the independent vote. But it has been projected for Trump and given him a whopping 53% share of the vote. So it seems even in this state with many religious people, Latter-day Saint community, that has not been enough to deter them from voting Republican and for Donald Trump, a man who doesn't really conform to their type of candidate for the Republicans. It tends to suggest that this has not been about one candidate or another, but about social values, about retaining the Republican red conservatism of their states. Maybe it all comes down to the Supreme Court and the kind of judgments that will be made there. That's perhaps for later in the night, but as things colour up, you can see what this has done to the tally. Clinton is short by 73, Trump is short by 77. It is an incredibly tight race. All this part of the West and the central part of America, Utah, we just added in there, colouring up in red, and we're still waiting to hear Washington, Nevada, Arizona's in the balance, and all these key races here as well.
Well, that's a very strong result for Mr. Trump in Utah. At one stage, Mr. McMullin, a Mormon, independent conservative, educated in Utah. He had hopes of winning that state, but in fact his performance was pretty poor. I want to go back to Jeremy Vine in a minute to get some more figures. But before I do, Catty, this isn't just looking like a victory, heading for a victory for Mr. Trump, though we don't know for sure. Yet it's a lot more than that, isn't it? Big enough as that is.
We spoke about a month ago about the possibility of a wave election in America, and we were thinking that it was Hillary Clinton who was going to be riding that wave. Yep. It now looks like we could be going the other way. We're also looking at a Republican Senate, and we're looking at a Republican House. And with all of that comes the possibility of not just one seat on the Supreme Court, which would swing it back to being a Republican Supreme Court, but 2 seats potentially on the Supreme Court, which really makes it a Republican Supreme Court. We are looking, Andrew, if all of these numbers bear out and what Norm is saying about his predictions for Wisconsin and Michigan bear out, we're looking at an America that is very Republican for the next 4 years, but that is led by a president who, if you take his economic policies alone and his more isolationist, less hawkish foreign policy, is actually not as conservative as this movement that he is leading. Now, this is going to be fascinating. We are certainly looking at a Republican era in American politics. And the impact of that around the world is going to be tremendous.
Well, one of the areas where Mr. Trump has done very well and concentrated on was the Midwest, the states around the Great Lakes, the states that go from Wisconsin all the way through to Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania. It is a kind of middle America par excellence, and that is where Mr. Trump has particularly resonated with blue-collar workers. Let's get more on this from Jeremy Vine and the exit polls.
Well, yes, the result from Ohio still echoing around our virtual graphics room because the parsing that we've done of the exit polls suggests he really did get white men in particular turning out for him. Now, at some point here in the Midwest, Hillary Clinton needs to build a firebreak and stop these losses to the Republicans spreading. So let's look first of all at Michigan here, and we'll look at particularly this theme of if white voters are going for Trump, how vulnerable is Michigan to the Republican Party? Now here it is, and you can see it's actually not one of the most white states in that area, but it is 76% white. The US average is 62%. If you come over here, you see the map of Michigan as it's being coloured in, as the voting is counting. And of course, you see Detroit there, and Detroit, wherever you live in the world, you know it for the auto industry and all the pain it's suffered since then with the recession and so on. And that very much sums up some of the feeling in and around the state, some of the disaffection that is powering Trump. So what's happening with those voters, those white voters that are the core of Trump's appeal? Well, the answer is, according to our exit poll, look at this, 64% Republican. Andrew, back to you.
To Emily.
In the last few seconds, they have just called Florida for Donald Trump. It has been projected for the Republicans for Donald Trump on 49.1% share of the vote. Incredibly tight, but not as tight as it was last time round. Last time, you might remember, it was never called at all. 100% of the precincts in, they are confident that this goes in the red tally for Donald Trump, and that is why it matters. 29 electoral college votes. With that now on the map, he can do practically anything. Let's just have a look at it, and you'll see what I mean. He's coloured in Florida. His tally has shot up to 222. He's now short by 48. If I take you into my calculator mode and show you what that means, if he adds in Arizona, which was won by Romney last time round, if he takes Iowa, won by Romney last time round, if he takes Georgia, where he's ahead, if he takes Alaska, let's put that in, that one is in no doubt, he's only short by 12. What that means at this stage is that he can take Michigan or Pennsylvania or a combination of Wisconsin and New Hampshire, plus we can assume one or two, probably main two there, then he has done it. He hasn't done it yet, and all those races are still very heated and very on. And it's important to notice that at this point, the only states he's actually taken, the only ones that have changed hands, are Ohio and Florida. But we began the night by saying, for Donald Trump to really find his path, he needs to take Florida and Ohio and Pennsylvania. He needs to take some combination, or pretty much all three of those. He's taken two of them. Suddenly, it's all looking much more possible tonight.
It does indeed. Let's get some more pictures of the celebrations among Mr. Trump's supporters. And as you can see, not surprisingly, they're pretty happy. Emily was saying there of course, there's still a number of states he has to take. But if you look at what's happened tonight, it's a pretty fair guess that Arizona, Georgia, Alaska, they are now going to go for Mr. Trump. We don't know for sure, of course, but given the way other states, tougher states, have been that he's done so well, then he must now be pretty confident that some of these states are going to fall. So it is clear, as you can see from the celebrations there, Mr. Trump supporters, Trump headquarters, think that he has won. We don't know that yet, but they see the way the wind is blowing, and we don't know yet where Mr. Trump will come on. No doubt he'll have to pass the 270 mark first, but he's getting close to that, 222. He's not that far away. You wouldn't want to count your chickens before they're hatched, Catty, but if you were in the Trump campaign, you were beginning to think, we've done it.
And I wonder whether that cheer we were just hearing as we were listening to those Trump campaign pictures and watching those wasn't because Fox News has now called Wisconsin for Trump. We are not ready to do that yet. The other networks are not doing that yet, but that is from Fox News. And of course, they'll be playing Fox News at Trump headquarters, so they will have heard that. And I wonder if that's not what that cheer is about. It's looking increasingly difficult for Hillary Clinton to find herself a route to 270. Ben LeBolt, you're watching these numbers come in. President Obama, your former boss, worked his heart out to get Hillary Clinton elected. He was there last night in Pennsylvania. What does this say about President Obama's legacy as well?
Well, here's what is so surprising about tonight, that President Obama right now is at a 54% approval rating in America, which is the highest approval rating we've had since Ronald Reagan in 1988. So there's a real question tonight about who's showing up at the polls. And I think Norm spoke about this earlier, that African-American turnout is a little bit soft. I think when we look at these numbers at the end of the day, it may be a different electorate if there is a President Trump that elected Donald Trump, then Barack Obama. We may have seen soft turnout among African Americans and millennials, and some of the older white voters could be the decisive margin tonight.
How do you account for what you're seeing tonight, Ben, in terms of passing the baton from a President Obama to potentially to a President Donald Trump? And I'm going to say that one of the things I have heard out on the campaign trail, and I've heard it mostly from African American voters, and from women who have said to me that they think there is a section of the American community who just looked at the idea of having Barack Obama followed by Hillary Clinton. They said an African-American man followed by a woman was too much of a shock after 43 white men or 43 white presidents. That was just too much of a change for some people.
There could be some cultural factors driving it. Once we see the exits, we'll have to take a look at that question. There's also a question about whether they're voting against Washington in general. You know, while the president reached out to a Republican Congress, Republicans really refused to work with the president.
Let me interrupt you because we've got more results coming in. And I think, Emily, it's fair to say the jigsaw pieces are falling into Mr. Trump's plan.
I'd expect another big cheer from the Trump campaign crowd right now. We've just had Iowa projected for Trump, giving him 50% share of the vote with only half the precincts in, so they clearly think it's pretty emphatic. And here's why Iowa was interesting. It was the first caucus. It was the one that Trump didn't win. He lost out to Ted Cruz in this. We talked about it being a very religious community, broadly white community, traditional farming territory, the kind of demographic that played pretty well to the Texas Senator Ted Cruz. And yet here we are. Iowa has chosen Donald Trump on 50% share of the vote. It gives him those 6 electoral college votes. It's not the most number in terms of the races that are going on, but it certainly fills in, as Andrew said, the jigsaw here. It makes it even harder now for Hillary Clinton. If she has to take Iowa out of the mix, she's left with a range of these races here, and many of them she's not ahead in. Arizona, Nevada, he's ahead in Arizona. She might be ahead in Nevada now, but it's becoming much more clear that Trump's pathway is becoming easier. Florida, South Carolina, North Carolina, we're waiting for Georgia. He's got Iowa, he's got Ohio, he's got Utah, which at one point was in the balance. He can start to see how everything could fall into place with the next 3 or 4 results.
And some of the networks are already calling Georgia for Mr. Trump. And of course, it would be surprising, given everything else that happened, if Georgia did not end up in his column. We're not yet ready to project it, but it would seem that's the way it's going. Pennsylvania is still in contention, a big important state, 20 electoral college votes. Mrs. Clinton is still ahead there in Pennsylvania. So let's go to Jane O'Brien in Philadelphia.
Well, she may be ahead, but we've got some very, very worried Clinton supporters here. I'm in a historic bar in Philadelphia. This is one of her strongholds, and it was going very, very well at the beginning of the night, but now there's a real tension. And I've effectively assembled the League of Nations here. I have Miriam, who's from Iran. I have Argenta, who's from Poland. Sabi there is from India. Kashir is from Kosovo, and Rahil. How worried are you? you about
Well,
the race?
I am a little bit worried. I was really looking forward to Hillary winning and being the first woman president, and now we just have to watch and see. But it's very worrisome.
Now, obviously, you've been talking about immigration all night. Is this why you're worried?
I mean, he's a threat to the present and future immigrants of the country, and it's an actual real threat because he's a complete wild card, and we don't know. We've seen what he's expressed about immigrants, and which doesn't help us at all.
But you're in this country legally. Why would you be worried?
I'm extremely worried because he essentially stands for everything, against everything that we believe in and why we're here in the first place. So, I mean, it's just the basics of what we believe in, and it's always been about a country that accepts everybody from all walks of nations, and essentially we now have a president potentially that's against everything we believe in.
Miriam, is that what you feel?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm a last generation Iranian American, and coming here was filled with opportunity. I was able to get my degree in medicine, and part of the reason why, fervent reasons why I love this country so much is the diversity, and that you're able to get whatever opportunities that you strive for as long as you continue to work hard. So I think that, this is very sad, and I think that, people should be given a chance to come here and work for what they believe and get the opportunities they can.
And this is also a historic moment for you. You are hoping still, because, nobody has been declared a winner yet. Let's remember that.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that this election in general is historic, considering that a woman was nominated for presidency. I'm very proud as a woman. I think that there's still a chance, and if not, this still goes down in history as a major event. Having a woman out there, Hillary Clinton, representing the rest of us is a beautiful thing. So hopefully we can move forward together as a country and learn from this.
Raheel, you were saying that jokingly, I think, that you would catch the next plane out of here if Trump wins. But I mean, you are joking.
I am joking because this is such a great nation, and I have so much pride. And as an immigrant myself and my family, we came over here because America is a nation that, thrives based on its diversity. And the fact that, we have someone who could potentially become our president who spews rhetoric about hate against immigrants, hate against diversity. It's a scary thought, and that's why I said that in the joke.
Well, all of you, thank you very much indeed. You've been absolutely terrific, and thanks for giving us your views here on a very contentious evening. Back to you.
Okay, Jane, thanks very much there for us in Philadelphia. And of course, we still don't know the result in Pennsylvania. We're going to start getting reaction now from around the world, of course, to the news from here in the United States. Donald Trump is not there yet, but he's looking increasingly likely to get to that magic number of 270. It's news that Europeans will wake up to, Asians are already digesting, and that they are watching very closely, of course, in America's southern neighbor in Mexico. The BBC's Katie Watson is there. We've joked this evening a little bit, Katie, about how we've been watching the peso during this campaign. It goes up and down according to how well it looks like Donald Trump is doing. But what's going to be the reaction there in Mexico when they wake up to the news tomorrow morning, potentially, that Donald Trump has made it past that magic number of 270 electoral college votes?
Well, I don't think many Mexicans have gone to bed. They're watching very closely. I've just been in a bar where they started the evening, pretty upbeat in the last few weeks. Speaking to people here, they really felt that maybe Donald Trump wasn't going to win. And of course, he doesn't have many fans here in Mexico. As the night's gone on, that certainty certainly changed. People here have become a bit more worried. We've seen the peso. I mean, the peso's been tied to the what's been happening in politics in the United States in the past few months. It dropped as much as 10%. That's the biggest fall since 1994, when Mexico devalued its peso. It was a huge crisis here. So, that's a big concern. And I think that's what the main issue is here in Mexico. Yes, politically, it's been very damaging. But really, what does it mean if Trump does win for the Mexican economy? And that's what Mexicans are very worried about.
One of the things that Donald Trump has proposed, Katie, as I'm sure you know, is banning all remittances from Mexicans who are here in the United States illegally back to Mexico. It's a big source of revenue for the Mexican economy. It's not clear how he could actually do that. First of all, he'd have to identify these people, and then he'd have to impound all of their remittances. But it's, I imagine, the kind of thing that would make Mexicans think that a Donald Trump presidency is not going to be great for the Mexican economy. And what about all those Mexicans who are here illegally? What happens to them under a Donald Trump presidency?
Absolutely. I mean, remittances are worth about $25 billion they were last year. That's more than oil bringing in terms of foreign revenue. So it's a massive deal for Mexico, and it's a massive concern for Mexico. Not only that, you know, Donald Trump has been talking about renegotiating the North American Free Trade Agreement, and that's a big concern for Mexico because that's done, you know, it's done very well. So, you know, Mexico and the United States are neighbours, but they're huge trading partners. So that is a massive concern for any Mexican, whether they, you know, have family in the United States illegally or legally. You know, I was talking to a Mexican who's also got American nationality who voted in these elections. He came in this evening guaranteeing that, you know, Trump was going to win. He had it down, and you know, it looks like, you know, at the moment that's, you know, what his predictions are coming into play. But you know, for the average Mexican, whether it's remittances being brought over from the United States to help families here, or just general trade, it's a huge concern for people here, for everybody here.
Okay, Katie Watson there in Mexico City. Mexicans, of course, watching this very closely. One of the things that Donald Trump, by the way, Andrew, never rode back on, because he's rode back on some of the more controversial things he said, like the ban and total ban on Muslims. He never rode back on the wall. He says right up until the end that there will be a wall. It's a big point in his campaigns, and that the Mexicans will pay for it. The Mexican government has said they wouldn't. The question is going to be, if he has the Senate and he has Congress, could he go to the Senate and to Congress and say, right, I want the money for building that wall?
Well, he would need the House to pay for it.
He would need the House to pay for it, but he has a Republican House.
Who knows? Let's just go to Democratic headquarters tonight here in New York and get some pictures. It is obviously not a happy scene. People crying there in tears. Some of the younger voters and supporters of Hillary Clinton there. I think it's probably come as a shock to them, which is why it seems to be hurting so much. People shaking their heads, really stunned into silence there, because I guess as they moved in to tonight's results coming out, they were expecting that their candidate would be the next president of the United States. It's got a sense there of more of a wake than anything else now, as they try to come to terms with it. So there we are, Clinton headquarters. We don't know yet who has won. Mr. Trump hasn't passed the 270 mark, but it's clear from these faces that a lot of Hillary Clinton supporters are concluding that the game is up for tonight and that their woman will not be the next president. Let's get more reaction from the markets. Let's go back to Singapore. Our correspondent, Karishma, is there. What's happening in the markets now?
Well, there's a real sense of disbelief, I think it would be fair to say, amongst many of the traders here at this Singapore trading floor, now that it looks like Mr. Trump has an increasing chance at victory. And I think you're seeing that reflected across Asian share markets. Most of the major, in fact, all of the major Asian share markets are down significantly. We've seen Japan's Nikkei down by about 4.2%. Now, that's as a result of the fact that you're seeing many investors in Asia rushing to safe haven stocks and currencies like the Japanese yen. There's a real risk aversion right now that traders have been telling me about, and the sentiment is really souring. And now why is that? That's because a Clinton victory was seen as broadly positive for Asia's economies, because it was, as one analyst put it to me ahead of the election, very much a case of the devil that you know. Mrs. Clinton is very well known out in Asia. She's been Secretary of State. She's traveled out to these parts before. But certainly Mr. Trump is seen as the great unknown, and that brings with it uncertainty, volatility, and also some of the comments he's made on the campaign trail about slapping 45% taxes, import tariffs on Chinese goods, for instance. All of that is concerning many Asian investors, I should say, and that's what you're seeing reflected across share markets and currencies in Asia today.
All right, well, thank you for that. Clearly, there's going to be ructions in the financial markets when they open in Europe, first of all, London, and then in New York. In a moment, we're going to speak to Robert Reich, who was the Secretary of State for Labour in the Clinton administration. But let's go back to Emily. What's the arithmetic looking like now?
It's not over yet, but I've pulled up 3 races which are incredibly tight, which matter right now, and Donald Trump is ahead in each of them. Look at Wisconsin, he's on 49% there, with 75% of the precincts in. Look at Arizona, 49% there, she's 3 points behind, with 54% of the precincts in. Look at New Hampshire, he's ahead just slightly, almost 2 percentage points. They've got 67% of the precincts in there. If he gets these 3 states, you can add up the tally. He's got himself another 25 electoral college votes. Let's just put that into the maths. Now, Georgia has just been called, okay? This is the projection for Trump on 52% share of the vote. It gives him 16 electoral college votes. Now, if I take you back to that map, we go into the calculator mode, I'm going to add in the ones that we were just looking at. Wisconsin, Arizona, New Hampshire. Look what that does to the maths now. If he gets those 3, and we've just had Georgia called, he's short by 1. He can do that with any of these states. He can even do it with 1 bit of Maine. 1 congressional district gives him 1 more point, and he's crossed the line. It's very easy for him now.
So there we are. Mr. Trump heading towards 270, but he's not there yet. And of course, it's not impossible they'd both end up with 269. Just to complicate things, then throw it to the House of Representatives. Let's speak to Robert Reich, the former Labour Secretary of the Clinton administration. He comes to us from Berkeley in California. Mr. Reich, the Democrats have been in the White House, I think I've got this right, for 16 out of the last 24 years. Why have they lost the support of blue-collar workers?
The Democrats really turned their backs on a lot of the working class in their pursuit of suburban swing voters, upper middle class voters, also becoming very, very dependent on big money. As inequality has widened in the United States, the Democrats, like the Republicans, the official Republican Party, went after the affluent because the affluent could support their campaigns. This astounding turn of events tonight, I believe, is very much an anti-establishment revolt, if you will, not unlike Brexit. The establishment part of the Republican Party, remember, does not like Donald Trump. Wall Street does not like and does not support Donald Trump. Big corporations in the United States have been supportive of Hillary Clinton, by and large, not Donald Trump. And so that you have to look at this not only as the Democrats deserting white-collar, or at least blue-collar, rather, America, but also as a lot of America, mostly blue-collar, basically deserting the establishment and abandoning the establishment, saying to the establishment of the United States, we are no longer going to settle for stagnant wages and for declining hopes.
Would you agree, Mr. Reich, it's not clear how the Democrats get these voters back?
No, it's not clear at all. I think that there is going to be, to say the least, a lot of soul-searching in the Democratic Party, as there has been and will be in the Republican Party. I mean, there's a massive realignment. If you look at both parties, Bernie Sanders, who was the primary challenger for Hillary Clinton in the Democratic Party, took 22 states. This is the most unlikely candidate anybody came up with to be a Democratic challenger. And then here you have Donald Trump almost at this hour winning the presidency of the United States. Again, the most unlikely challenger to the typical Republican candidate. I mean, he has as much to do and as much in common with Mitt Romney or George W. Bush as he does practically with most Democrats. I mean, I can't describe for you the extent to which America is surprised and shocked, even again, including most of the business class, most of the Republicans who have been assuming that the polls and the assumptions that underlay all of official Washington and official New York were that Hillary Clinton would be elected president.
How much, Mr. Reich, will Congress, even if it's a Republican Congress, be a constraint on Mr. Trump's tax and spending plans? Because the Congressional Budget Office projects a massive increase in the budget deficit and the country's national debt if he was to proceed with his plans. And can he start a trade war without the support of Congress? Because there must be great fears now that if he means what he says on trade policy, we're moving back to Smoot-Hawley in the 1930s and a beggar-thy-neighbour policy.
Yes. Well, congressional Republicans, and let's assume for the sake of the argument that the Congress stays in Republican hands, both the House and the Senate, I think they will be very resistant to Donald Trump's budget plans because most Republicans still believe in deficit reductions, in small government. Donald Trump is very different from all of that view. Donald Trump has a gigantic budget deficit built into his economic plan and is not small government at all. At the same time, most Republicans in Congress are free traders. The business class of America are free traders. Now, here it becomes interesting because under most of our trade laws, the president does have a great deal of discretion to renegotiate them or even turn his back on them, basically repeal those trade laws. And that would put Donald Trump in a clash with Congress, but the president does have that power.
Robert Reich, thank you for being with us tonight and going through some of these issues, and we'll talk more about them when we get the picture is clear. You get a sense from listening to Robert Reich there that there could well be a clash between a Trump presidency and even a Republican Congress.
It's certainly true that there could be a clash between a Trump presidency and members of the Republican business-leaning establishment. The question will be whether the House of Representatives, many of whom support Donald Trump and which has been leaning more conservative over the last few years, decides to fall in line with President Trump. And it's hard to see President Trump, and it's hard to see why they wouldn't do. Let's go back to the Trump headquarters now. Look, you can see the crowd building there. They're going to start waiting.
In regard, we've lost a lot of jobs to the manufacturing leaving and going offshore. And when he began to speak to that, there was, like he's always says, it's a movement. And people got behind that message, and maybe it didn't resonate in the polls so much coming into it, but there was a huge groundswell that we kind of knew was there of people that would come out and support him in the booth that would necessarily support him in public.
Joe Borelli, behind us, the TV screen is projecting that Donald Trump is just 16 electoral college votes away from the White House. Does that surprise you?
Look, I'm someone who supported Donald Trump since 2013, but even I have to admit right now, I'm surprised to some degree that we've won. The message was always...
You haven't quite, but nearly.
Look, the message was always right, though. The message is the insiders versus the outsiders. And Trump is someone who really cornered the momentum of people who are just frustrated with a system that never seems to benefit them. And those are the people, as the pastor said, in Ohio and in Pennsylvania, Michigan, those are the people that feel frustrated and who've now come out.
But the popular vote is looking to be pretty close, so we're a divided nation if President Trump wins. Pastor, if President Trump-elect comes here tonight to address all of us, what tone do you want to hear him strike?
Well, of course, you want him to celebrate, but you also want him to have a message of healing and bringing the country together. And I believe that he's going to talk about that, about now the little guy or the people having their republic back, because it's been in the hands of the folks that control it, and we thought we've been a part of it, but we've been on the outside of it. And so I agree with my councilman and friend here that now it's being put back in the hands of people that will send our message to him, and then he will resonate that and lead accordingly.
Joe, this has been a very divisive and bruising campaign, and Mr. Trump has had a lot to do with that, setting the tone of it. Can he govern for all of America if he's elected?
Sure. There's been times where he's said things that myself and others have sort of disavowed and said he didn't use the right terminology. But,
when you're president, it's a mighty big megaphone.
He's got a big megaphone, certainly, but if he chose the wrong words when describing the immigration system, it doesn't detract from the actual concept that the immigration system has a problem and needs to be corrected. So enough Americans realize that maybe he doesn't say the right thing all the time, maybe he doesn't always choose the right words, but we need a fundamental change in the direction of the country, and that's who the voters have now chosen.
And Pastor Davies, we were chatting earlier, you're hearing that Donald Trump has done better with African Americans than Mitt Romney did. He was criticized in the campaign for having a rather patronizing tone. You guys have never had it so bad. What have you got to lose in your inner cities? Vote for me. Did you agree with the tone of that?
You know what? I agree with it to the degree that he was telling the truth. And some people had a problem with the tone and the venue, that it wasn't necessarily in black communities where he was making those statements, but wherever he talks, people listen. And so I believe that African Americans begin to hear his message, and as a result, they came out 2-3 times more than what they thought. At one time, all the media was saying it's going to be less than 1%. Well, I'm standing here, and there are thousands of others that have stood with him. We stood with him from the beginning. Back when he announced that we were going to be there, and now across the nation, we're getting ready to see. We haven't seen the full exit polls yet, but we believe it's going to be a big number.
Not sure that we really believe a lot of what exit polls tell us necessarily after tonight, but Joe, the tone that he struck on foreign policy, on NATO allies, suggesting that they should have to pay their way. Do you think if he is elected president, he would be that blunt in person?
Well, to be frank with you, the agreement that NATO countries signed when they formed the NATO alliance guaranteed, I believe the number was 2% of their GDP, and some countries have not lived up to that. So I think he's very factually accurate. Where the chips fall when it actually comes down to dealing with other countries, I think you might see a difference. But he wasn't wrong to say that other countries are not living up to what they were expected to pay under the original NATO agreement, and that's just a fact.
All right, Joe Borelli, Pastor Davis, thank you so much for joining us here at Trump headquarters. Appreciate your time. So there's the mood here at Trump headquarters. People really can see that the Trump presidency that maybe at the beginning of the night they didn't think was a possibility, that now they feel that they can almost reach out and touch it. Andrew and Catty, back to you.
Thanks, Laura. This is turning out to be the most remarkable political night in modern history, anywhere in any country. Donald Trump promised Brexit times 10. We thought Brexit was in itself a remarkable event, but it looks like he's delivering on his promise and he's beating Brexit. It may not be times 10, but it's certainly times 2, 3, or 4. I cannot remember any other election night that has ever been like this. Donald Trump is now 26 electoral college votes away from being the next president of the United States. And there are a number of states which suggest he could do that. He's a little bit ahead in the Nebraska 2nd District, a state that splits its votes. That would only give him 1, but it's 1 towards it. Mrs. Clinton is just a little bit ahead in Pennsylvania, but Mr. Trump is catching up. He's ahead in New Hampshire. He's a little bit ahead in Michigan. Wisconsin, many have now called Wisconsin for Donald Trump. Is there any way, as things stand now, that Hillary Clinton could be the next president?
It looks very, very, very difficult at this point, and the paths seem to be closing. I think this comes as a huge surprise to Democrats across the country tonight. It comes as a huge surprise to pundits.
To pollsters?
To pundits and pollsters. And I think, look...
To everyone. Even the Trump people, they're surprised by this.
And one interesting thing is that it looks like Hillary Clinton could win the popular vote tonight. In fact, the New York Times is projecting that she may well but lose the Electoral College and therefore not become president. So a President Trump is going to have to do work to bridge the divide in this country, and he really used his campaign to heighten the divide in this country. So it's going to take a long healing process.
Is Mr. Trump a healer?
Well, he may not be a healer, but, go back to his original positions before he decided to run for president, and he was pretty much a Democrat. So it's not, we know he changes, and I say that, a little tongue-in-cheek, but we know he is willing to change his positions, and I think that being so ego-driven, the fact that he will be the one to get something done, I think he's willing to really kind of give up on a lot of the things that he ran on.
This is a huge achievement for Donald Trump.
It's tremendous. Donald Trump crushed it tonight. Again, we started off the night saying his pathway is very, very narrow. And now we're saying
Mrs. Clinton's pathway now.
6 hours later, we're saying that Mrs. Clinton may not be able to make it or probably won't right now as the odds are looking. But credit to where credit is due. He stayed focused. He kept on message, I think, which was very important for the last 9 or 10 days. And no one ever thought that would happen. That was almost the November surprise. And he grinded it out, and so did his team.
And it's worth remembering, of course, that Donald Trump has done this without the full backing of the Republican Party. They didn't throw their weight behind him. Without, for example, President and Laura Bush, who didn't even vote for him. Without the star power of Michelle and Barack Obama, who have campaigned relentlessly for Hillary Clinton. He's done this pretty much by himself.
Yes.
I mean, the interesting thing about Donald Trump is there are really not very many Donald Trump surrogates, because this is a campaign about one person. And some people said to me early on in the course of this campaign, watch what this tells you about American television viewing habits, because people on the East Coast and the West Coast failed to appreciate the degree to which Donald Trump was familiar to ordinary Americans in the middle of the country just from The Apprentice.
But this reliance on one person, I mean, that's really a dangerous way to govern. You know, he's said during this campaign that he's his own top foreign policy advisor. So if he steps into the Oval Office, you know, he'd be the first president in history to rely just on himself as his top advisor, and he'll really have to grow into the job and change his mentality on that fundamental question.
You know, a couple of points. One, I had a Turkish friend say, "Welcome to my world." This is very much like what we saw in Turkey. The urban sophisticates, well, forget the coup. We had a vote where the urban, sophisticated population voted massively against him, and the rural, nationalistic, religious population brought him into power. And we're having that kind of a divide here.
Indeed.
But look at the role of Mitch McConnell now, who's in a very tough position. Trump's going to be pushing Republican leader. Trump's going to be pushing him to do things that a lot of Republicans don't like. And we're also going to have the Democrats in the Senate who will filibuster any of these initiatives that they would view as reckless. And you're going to see pressure on McConnell to blow up the filibuster rule entirely.
We have to go by Donald Trump started this campaign. And listen, I'm someone who didn't see him. I didn't support him. I didn't see him winning. But the fact is he did say, I'm a deal maker. And that is part of the skill set that he will bring to making deals, because, again, he's willing to compromise.
We are moving into uncharted territory here. This is what makes it so fascinating. The fact is, most people, including ourselves, we have no idea, really, what a Trump presidency will look like and what he will do, or what a Trump administration will consist of, who will take the most important positions. But something has happened in American politics tonight that we're all grappling to try to understand. Let's go back to Jeremy. He's got lots of figures.
Yes, and actually looking back at that Ohio result and looking at whether it might be replicated in other states around it here in the Midwest, so-called Rust Belt states. We mentioned earlier Michigan, and we're focusing here on the vote of white people in Michigan. And what seems to be happening here with Trump and why he's been successful is that in states where there is a white population that is higher than average in the USA, average is 62%, Michigan is 76%, then he turns out voters and he wins. Now, could he win Michigan, which was blue last time? Let's just have a look at what he's done among those white voters. 64% going to Trump. It looks very, very good for him, because this is the majority of voters that we're talking about. This is white men we're talking about. Democrats, 28%. Now, if we put up white women, we might well find Trump in the lead there as well. He was in the lead among white women in Ohio. So in certain states, he has absolutely super mobilized the white vote. And that leads you to wonder whether he might even take Wisconsin. Hillary Clinton didn't go to this state when she was campaigning. It wasn't even really thought to be on the Republican target list in lots and lots of scenarios. But look here, the racial profile of Wisconsin, it really is. It's 20% ahead of the rest of the USA in terms of its white population, 82% white in Wisconsin. And again, we look at our exit poll, and again, you see the strength, how Trump is powered through these states. 55% of white men voting for him, white men in particular, and a big, almost 20-point gap with Hillary Clinton here. So there'll be a lot of analysis of this result. But what he's done is he's turned certain groups of voters into cohorts, and they've acted in a really super concentrated way to get him elected, if that is what's happened. And he's almost, as somebody said earlier, he's almost got white men in certain states to behave like a minority. And this has done a brilliant job of work for him. And these two states, if these come in, if they're confirmed for Trump, there really is no way back for Hillary Clinton. So there's going to be so much analysis of this voting. It's absolutely remarkable. It's the opposite of center ground politics, Andrew, isn't it?
It certainly is, Jeremy, the very opposite of it. And of course, during the campaign, there was a lot of talk about inequality in America and how the top 1% had done so well, but average wages had barely grown at all in real terms over the past 30 years. Only recently did we see a bit of a spike. Well, Mr. Trump's victory is going to do something for inequality right away. That's because the financial markets look like they're heading for a massive crash when they open in Europe and the United States. And if you're wealthy with assets and stocks and bonds and so on, you're going to take a major hit when they open. Now, of course, they could easily reverse. But for the moment, Katie, it looks like there's almost like a meltdown beginning being predicted in the Dow.
It's starting to look like that. Dow futures have tumbled. S&P 500 futures have plunged 5%. We're getting the same story from markets in Asia as well. I'm trying to roll through my Twitter feed fast enough because this is happening. This news, of course, is coming into these markets very fast. You're right. It can bounce back up again, but don't be surprised if when New York opens tomorrow, we don't see a similar sinking on the Dow. Or the dollar, I imagine. We're going to see the dollar. The dollar, of course, has been very strong against sterling recently. You all know that, having come over here and finding it terribly expensive.
We may have a stronger sterling before the end of this programme.
We were starting to look at, one-to-one. It's certainly not going to be looking at that way. So I think you're going to have a very big impact on the financial markets. Now, that doesn't necessarily have to last.
No.
But I think it's going to be the instant reaction of traders and investors is going to be negative to the prospect of President Donald Trump.
Let's go back to Kim Gattas at Clinton headquarters. I described it earlier, Kim, as looking like a wake. I would think that description still holds.
Yes, absolutely. The mood here is very grim. People holding hands, hugging. Some of them, teary-eyed, not quite ready to to admit defeat, but very, very grim here. Even if she still squeaks by and has a very, very, very narrow win, they will be asking themselves, how could this happen? How could it be that she didn't have a better victory, a bigger victory? And of course, we're still looking, at the possibility of a loss and a Trump victory. I've spoken to some of the supporters and her close friends, and they say that to them this looks terrifying. They told me that, yes, they were very upbeat yesterday and still putting a brave face on today. They think that she can still win if she gets Michigan, but it is getting very, very narrow. And I think that a lot of questions will be asked about the ground operation, about the internal polling, and frankly about polling in general. I mean, I think that's the story of the night as well, because a lot of the exit polls were wrong initially. But also this issue of the connection between her and the voters, the connection between the Washington establishment and, middle America that Donald Trump has so well connected with so well. I remember speaking to a Clinton aide just a few weeks ago when I asked how did they feel about the prospects. They said, well, we think that we will win. And if we don't, then perhaps we don't know this country anymore. And that is the other question, that they will be asking themselves today. Were they this disconnected that they didn't judge properly exactly what the message was that they had to give to the voters, how to connect with them? For a very long time, Clinton's message was mostly negative. It was the anti-Trump campaign. And only in the last week or so did she bring this positivity, this upbeat tone. Only in recent days did she start talking, did her campaigning improve really? And already you can hear people say that if she had done this from the beginning, perhaps it would have served her better. But of course, still waiting for the final result. Still occasionally some cheering here when there's a bit of good news that shows up from here and there. But it is very grim. And it has turned very quickly, because remember when we spoke earlier this evening, I was telling you that her aides were feeling upbeat. They were telling me that things were looking good. They didn't know how good, but they were confident. And something has gone terribly wrong when it comes to how the Clinton campaign has carried out its operation, even its ground operation, underestimating the surge of voters for Trump and how that would cancel out their own surge, the surge in their favor that we saw in states like Nevada and Florida with the Hispanic voters.
All right, Kim, thanks for that. Latest reports there from the Clinton headquarters. One small ray of hope that Mrs. Clinton still had was Pennsylvania. It's worth 20 electoral college votes. It was a state that, to begin with, people thought was going to be a stretch for Mr. Trump to win. Through most of the counting tonight, Mrs. Clinton has been ahead. But now, with 94% of the precincts in, Mr. Trump has just taken a small lead. And so it could be that as more of the rural areas of Pennsylvania come in, Mrs. Clinton obviously doing well in Philadelphia. She will have taken Philadelphia. She will have taken Pittsburgh too, the other big city in the west of the state. But the rural areas in between, remember, that's where they shot the deer hunter. It's very different from Pittsburgh or Pennsylvania. They are now coming in for Mr. Trump, and that looks like he could well just get that too. And if he gets that, Emily, he's not there, but he's pretty much there.
What have we learnt tonight? That it might be time to throw professional political polling out the window for a while and go back to Paul the Octopus and his 8 tentacles. It seems as good a chance as any of getting things right.
Is he here?
We're getting him. We've fast-styled him. We're going to call him up. This is why, if you've just joined us, this is the state of the race as things stand. Everything that you wake up to coloured in red has been taken by Donald Trump. Everything that you can see coloured up in blue has been taken by Hillary Clinton for the Democrats, and everything that is in grey is still in play. Those are the big battles we're waiting for. But this is what we're looking at, the 270 electoral college votes that is needed to win the White House. And as things stand, Donald Trump is only short by 26. Hillary Clinton is short by 61. Her race, by the maths, given the state of the races that we're being looking at, is almost impossible now. Her race is getting much, much harder. So I've put this in a calculator mode. I've put the pen in blue. So I'm going to colour in states that she could still win. We think she could still take Nevada. That gives her another 6. It means she's only short by 55. We could give her Minnesota. That looks as if it's going her way. That's another 10. She's now short by 45. Let's give her Maine. And Maine 1, a congressional district here. It splits its vote. It splits electoral college. She's still short by 42. As Andrew was saying just then, Donald Trump is even in the lead in Pennsylvania. He's in the lead in Minnesota. He's in the lead in Wisconsin. Let's imagine that the lead in Pennsylvania is very tight at the moment. She can still claw that back. OK, she's got it. Hurrah. Does that do it? It doesn't. She's still short by 22 electoral college votes. And now we've got to give her something to get her over the line that is not really in play, like Arizona. At one stage, it looked as if it might be in play for the Democrats. Not tonight. He's ahead in Wisconsin. He's ahead in Michigan. He's ahead in New Hampshire. He's ahead in the 2nd Congressional District of Maine. So even if one of those comes right for her, and let's imagine it's Michigan, she still can't do it. She still hasn't done it at this point. She has to take Michigan and Wisconsin, or Wisconsin and Arizona, or Wisconsin and New Hampshire and Maine 2nd District as well. It's getting increasingly difficult to see how she manages to pull that off when, just to take you back, she is short by 61 electoral college votes at this stage in the night.
Thanks, Emily. Now, the Democrats have held on to the Senate seat that was up for grabs in Nevada. It was vacated by the retirement of Harry Reid, who was the leader of the Democrats in the Senate, a veteran politician. So that meant there was no incumbent. It was up for grabs. But Cortez Masto for the Democrats has won, beating Mr. Heck for the Republicans. But they already had that. It doesn't help them gain the Senate, because that simply gives them a seat that they already had in there. One seat that Mrs. Clinton has to win tonight if she has any chance, and that is diminishing. One area is Nevada there, and we haven't yet heard from it. It was a state that was in the Clinton column, at least leaning that way. Let's go to our correspondent, James Cook, in Las Vegas. What are you hearing, James?
Well, in terms of the results here, Andrew, at the moment, just 15% of precincts reporting here. Hillary Clinton has a slight edge at the moment. But as you say, the main news in the past few minutes, that breaking news that Catherine Cortez Masto has been elected to the Senate, replacing, as you say, Harry Reid. So not a gain for the Democrats, who look like at this stage they are on their way to losing the Senate, the House of Representatives, and the presidency as well. If Hillary Clinton wants to win, she's going to have to pull off an escape act that would wow the crowds here on the Las Vegas Strip. It's looking increasingly difficult for her to do so. But let's have a discussion about what this means, particularly for Latinos, because people said that this was going to be the election of Latinos, and this was going to be the moment when they stepped up and voted for Hillary Clinton. We're joined by Leo Murrieta, political analyst.
It's fair to say.
Ana Castro from Mi Familia Vota, which is an organisation getting the vote out. Ana, first of all, well, we should note that the election of Catherine Cortez Masto is actually historic. She's the first Latina ever elected to the U.S. Senate.
Yes, a part of our democracy is being able to see ourselves in our elected officials, and having a diverse electorate is key to actually ensuring that policies that benefit Latinos are actually enacted.
Donald Trump has promised to build a wall along the border with Mexico, a giant wall. He's promised to crack down on immigration. He's promised to deport 11 million plus undocumented or illegal immigrants in this country. If he's president, what does that mean for Latinos in the United States?
The reality is that Latinos turned out to vote in historic numbers in this election. The work was only just beginning here on November 8th. The wall, there is a wall in the southern border, and what he talks about in terms of his rhetoric of deporting 11 million people is not going to happen. We are here to stay. We are here to mobilize. Our kids are going to keep voting. We're going to keep voting. This is just the beginning of a lot of work.
I mean, you say there's a wall. To be fair, there's fencing and walls at certain points. There clearly isn't one all the way along. But Leo Murrieta, the thing about the wall is that, and the immigration policy, is that, are we wrong to try to judge the Latino vote as a bloc, as a homogenous vote? Because I've spoken to quite a lot of people who say, well, I came here legally, why should others be allowed to come in illegally?
Well, what we know is that the Latino vote is not a monolith. And every single campaign has to sit down with Latinos and Hispanic voters all across the country and talk to them about the issues that matter to them. And poll after poll shows that immigration isn't always the top issue. It's jobs in the economy, healthcare, education, making sure that our families and our children have a brighter future than the ones that our parents had. So we're similar to every single voter, but every election, every campaign needs to take that into account, that we are not a monolithic group.
And if Donald Trump does become president, what do you think that means for communities that are growing? This is a growing demographic. Everyone said this is the demographic that you have to win elections. Is he proving us wrong?
Well, no, because what we're seeing is actually history in the making here in Nevada. We are the first ever Latina elected to the United States Senate that nobody thought would happen. The conservatives, the Koch brothers, spent millions upon millions of dollars. They gave up on Trump's presidency. They gave up months ago, and they decided to pour all of their money into races like Joe Heck, who aligned himself early on with Donald Trump. And in Nevada, that lost.
Okay, well, thank you both very much indeed, Leo Murrieta and Ana Castro. Thanks for talking to us here. I have to say, there's not a great deal of celebration from Latinos in this city. If Donald Trump becomes president, it's going to be an extraordinary period for that demographic. And this, I think, is going to be, if he does win, and it looks really as if the path for Hillary Clinton's victory now is so incredibly narrow, as if she's walking along a precipice at the top of a mountain, this will be a defining feature of the next 4 years, how he implements these pledges that he says he would put into place and which so many people regard as essentially unworkable.
Okay, James Cook there for us in Las Vegas. Probably the group that is going to be watching this most closely and trying to figure out what it means for them are people that are in the United States here, not legally, because of course they're the ones who could be the first targets of Donald Trump and his policies of trying to get them out of the country. Let's go back down to Miami. The BBC's Rajini Vaidyanathan is down there in Miami for us. I imagine that people down there in southern Miami, where you are, mostly the Democratic stronghold, Rajini, they always knew that Florida was going to be tight, but as they're watching the rest of the country go towards Donald Trump, what are they making of this wave, but it's not Hillary Clinton's wave, it's Donald Trump's wave that's sweeping America tonight.
Well, Kathy, I don't think it was a surprise that Florida was going to be close. Throughout the campaign, both candidates made several stops here because the polls were indicating in the final stretch that the two candidates were virtually neck and neck. Now, I'm joined by two young millennial voters, Ali and Ferocia. I'll start with you, Ali, because Ali, I met you at a Donald Trump rally in Miami, a couple of maybe 5 days ago or so. Thanks for coming along to meet us again tonight. How do you feel at the fact that Donald Trump's won this state?
I feel good about it. I didn't think that it was a surprise. You know, at his Trump rallies, you see a lot of people coming out. And I originally saw him months ago when it was between, you know, Ben Carson, Ted Cruz. Everyone showed up for Trump. You know, people were leaving for, sadly, Ben Carson, Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio. And, you know, I think the Republican Party had a good sense of confidence with Donald Trump.
Do you think some Trump supporters were just not willing to tell people out in the open that they supported Donald Trump? Certainly when I was in Tampa over the weekend, I met a young woman who voted for Donald Trump, and these are her words. She said she was ashamed to have voted for him, but she thought that he was the lesser of two evils. I met you at a rally where there were thousands of supporters, but have you found that some people didn't come forward and say they supported him, and that's why perhaps we're seeing what we're seeing?
Oh, for sure. I would consider myself that way for the most part, too. You know, as a millennial, people are pretty quick to say, you know, Donald Trump is not a good person, you know, he's not the right choice. And it's hard to depict what is the right choice in this election. So I can definitely say that people were afraid to admit it because of the harsh things he said about women, so on and so forth.
Let's bring Ferocia in. Ferocia, earlier when you found out that Donald Trump hadn't won Florida, you were pretty upset.
Yeah, I
won Florida, pardon me.
Yes, yeah. Well, I can say...
Sorry, I'm going to have to stop you there because I think we have a result, but hopefully we'll come back to you later, Ferocia.
Thanks, Virginia. We do indeed have another result, Emily.
Nevada has been called for Hillary Clinton, giving her 6 more electoral college votes. She'll be pleased, but to be fair, it is a little bit like too little, too late. It colours in the whole of this West Coast here. It puts her short now by just 55. But this still becomes really, really difficult, and here's why. She now has to get a combination of any of the places that Donald Trump is still ahead in. 55 is quite a lot to be short by at this stage. Even if she gets Pennsylvania, she's still short by 35. That means some combination of all of these has to be in her tally. If she takes Minnesota, she's still short by 25. If she takes Maine, the 1st district, which is likely to go Democrat, that's fine. It takes her up to 22. I don't know, she could take New Hampshire, let's imagine. She's short by 18. But you see where we are now. She still needs 2 of the states that are left. She needs Michigan and Wisconsin, or she needs Michigan and Arizona, and she needs Wisconsin and Arizona to get her there. She's done it, but that is looking really, really tough right now. All we've had in the last few moments is that one, Nevada. So it adds into her tally, but it doesn't change things. For this race to change now, all the places that are still battlegrounds that show Donald Trump in the lead have to be turned round. So in every remaining precinct, she has to start to take the lead in those states, and then she could amass another, 30, 35 or so electoral college votes. But to ask for all those races to be wrong at this stage in the day is quite a big one.
It is indeed. And we used to say that about Donald Trump's chances as well.
Yeah.
How things have changed. In terms of the vote, almost 75% of the country's precincts have now reported. 42 of 50 states we have projected. Mrs. Clinton has 51 million votes. Mr. Trump has 52 million votes. I round up these figures. That's pretty much broadly right. He's 1 million ahead. But supposing Mrs. Clinton in the end was to win the popular vote, not clear that that will happen, but but Mr. Trump wins the electoral college vote, for a divided nation, that would be terrible.
Well, take a look at the vote in 2000, Al Gore, George
Indeed.
Bush. We've faced similar situations before. It will be incumbent upon a President Trump in that scenario to reach out to the portion of the country that he alienated with this campaign, whether that's Hispanics, women, others that he campaigned against at portions of this campaign. And I think it will take a long time to undo that damage and to try to win trust of that population. There's a great divide, too, between the cities and the rural areas that
Sure
have
is.
to try to bridge.
But Susan, you talked earlier about him being a deal maker and being somebody who was prepared to compromise. But we have also heard accounts of somebody who, for example, said that if he is elected president, would sue the women who have accused him of sexually harassing them. We've heard accounts from Richard Branson, for example, of somebody who said that vengeance was a top priority of his in life. Do you think he is somebody who is prepared if he's elected president? And obviously the scenario changes when you get into the White House, as you know, Ben, and you get into the Oval Office, and the responsibility of the president cloaks you. Is he somebody, do you think, who will, as Ben is suggesting, reach out to those people who voted for Hillary Clinton and the people he's specifically, the groups in the country who he has alienated with some of his rhetoric?
I mean, it will be a humbling experience even to Donald Trump. There's no question about that. I mean, he's on his way to become the next president of the United States. What's also important is Donald Trump's ego, and I think he will want to go down as a very good president and someone who got things done. So maybe perhaps driven in part by ego, maybe in part by awe of the office, he can actually go and get something done. Do I think he's going to sue those women? Actually, I don't, because I think he will. One thing that we learned about Donald Trump is he will listen to advisors. It came very late in the game, but when he saw a way to win, which is when those Hillary Clinton emails or the letter with John Comey came out, of the director of the FBI, that's when he all of a sudden got very serious. He dropped another $10 million in his campaign. He was told there you could win, and he became disciplined. So, again, I'm as shocked as anybody, but I have to believe, or I at least have to hope, that he can do something positive for this country.
So, first we need to say it's not quite over yet.
No, it
it's
isn't.
Almost. I'm pessimistic about Mrs. Clinton's chances in Pennsylvania, where almost, ironically, she got more votes in Philadelphia than Barack Obama got the last time.
And he had pretty much a clean sweep.
And that was usually the key. Now we're getting just a massive increase in votes from other places, and she might lose narrowly. In Michigan and Wisconsin, we've got the college towns, Ann Arbor, Madison, that might help her a little bit. So we've got to take that into account. But I want to make a larger point about Mr. Trump, which is not so much about deal-making in the United States. His almost deeply embedded in his personality is if somebody attacks you, you hit them back harder, because if you don't, it's a sign of weakness. Now, remember when we had President Duterte in the Philippines call Barack Obama a son of a whore and say even worse things about others? A president has to just sort of swallow hard with some of those things and not retaliate. It's going to be very difficult to imagine a foreign policy where if your modus operandi is if somebody hits you, you hit them back harder, when you've got a lot of delicate alliances to work with. And I think that's where the choice of people, if he is a president, that he will have for his foreign policy positions, if he does go for the people who've been closest to him, Michael Flynn, who's clashed with almost everybody in foreign policy, a Rudy Giuliani or a Chris Christie as Attorney General, maybe a Newt Gingrich as Secretary of State, where we're going to see some of the challenges.
These are polarizing figures, you say.
But let's not forget one thing here. It's not like Donald Trump hid any of these traits away from the American public, who is on their way to electing him president. So the American public knows what they got, and it's not, we're not going to find these things out about the secret, Trump ego.
I have my own breaking news to announce, and that is that Donald Trump, so far tonight, has not claimed the election has been rigged. That may surprise you, but we've had no complaints that the election's been rigged so far. Throughout this campaign, there was much talk about how divided America is. Throughout, as the results have been coming in, it has pointed out how divided America is. As Mr. Trump, if that's what we're going to have, begins his presidency, and as Norm says, it's not over yet, there will be continued talk about it. Let's go back to Jeremy and get an idea of the divisions of the United States.
Andrew, we can look now at the actual votes and the exit polls and just have a portrait of how the country split when it came to deciding between these two candidates. So let's first look at this, the split between men and women. Absolutely straightforward, this. Men tended to go for Donald Trump, 53%, 41% of men across the US in this election going for Hillary Clinton. But then you ask women how they voted, and it switches around. So there's and it's a good 10, 12% gap here. So it's absolutely dramatic and clear, isn't there, that Trump and Clinton divided the reactions of men and women. That's the first thing. Now, let's take another way of looking at the population. Here we look at age. And here we see, and this in a way is, I guess, predictable, but it's still worth pointing out that there was a big lead for Hillary Clinton among the younger voters, where Trump only got 40%. But then you move to over 45s, and Trump takes the lead. So Trump is 53% to 44%. So you see, again, straight down the middle, division between the two candidates. And here is the most toxic one, the division on ethnic lines. Let me just come around the front of this to show you. If you look at the far end here, you see a huge advantage for Hillary Clinton among Hispanic voters, 65% to 29%. That's talk of building a wall and all of that stuff. Obviously, Donald Trump wasn't even trying to curry favor there. Have a look at black voters here, African-American voters. Look at the lead that Hillary Clinton has, 80% over Donald Trump in the voting at this election. Barack Obama's was greater for obvious reasons 4 years ago, but this is remarkable. Only 8% of black voters went for Trump. And then take a look here. And this is now white voters. And this is how Trump has, if he has won this election, this is how he's done it. By mobilizing white voters in far greater numbers, 58% to 37%. So this is probably the most difficult territory of all, the division between the two candidate supporters on ethnic lines. Andrew.
Jeremy, thanks for that. And while Jeremy was explaining the divisions in the United States, we're getting reports that at the Trump headquarters here in New York, obviously in a exuberant mood as these results come in, they started chanting of Mrs. Clinton, lock her up, lock her up. We heard that many times during the campaign itself. And if you wanted a symbol of a divided America, shouting of your opponent, lock her up, would seem to me to be a pretty potent symbol. Speaking of divisions, New Hampshire has still to report, but Norm, it seems very divided. Did you tell me there's 15 votes in
15 vote difference between the two of them at this point, with 82% of the precincts in. So it's still not clear to me where the vote is out in New Hampshire, and that's for electoral votes. But obviously, if we're talking about a contest where you may be able to find a path to victory with 271 or 272 electoral votes, that makes a big difference. I think for Mrs. Clinton, what may be the real downfall for her is the failure in Pennsylvania. If, in fact, all that we're seeing now, which is fundamentally that the only votes that are out in any large numbers are in the rural areas, she doesn't have really a path to win if she loses Pennsylvania.
And we've got a quick photo. Let's try and see if we can bring this up that's come in from the Trump headquarters. I wonder if we can put this up on the screen. It's a photo that's showing, there you go, Donald Trump, Mike Pence, I think that is on his right there, watching clearly the returns come in. I don't know if this is at the hotel somewhere else, but I imagine this is at the hotel, and I imagine he's starting to think about the victory speech that he might be able to give at some point during the course of this night. He's going to have to be weighing that up anyway, hasn't he, Andrew?
I think he would only be human to do so.
It would be only human.
It used to be that the Electoral College had an odd number as its total, which meant that you couldn't have a tie. But then in 1961, they gave 3 votes to Washington, D.C., which hadn't been included in the Electoral College before. And lo and behold, that took it to an even number, which means, Emily, it's arithmetically possible that each could get 269.
What we really need right now is an interesting turn of events, isn't it? Something just to excite the night a bit.
Because it's been a quiet night so
Yeah, it's
far.
been so quiet, we've been wondering what to do. This is a way, mathematically, that it could end in a tie, and I'll show you what I mean by that. I've pulled up 3 states where the races are still ongoing, and you can see just how tight they are. Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Minnesota. Minnesota, she's got a clearer lead in. She will expect to take Minnesota tonight. As you heard, Pennsylvania incredibly closely tied there, just 0.4% of a decimal place between them. Michigan, just 0.9% there, giving Trump a lead. But let's imagine that she manages to turn them round and she takes all these electoral college votes, 16, 20, and 10, 20, 30, 46. OK, I'm going to take you back into the map. She is short by 55. Just remember which ones we've now coloured in for her. Minnesota we've given her. Was it Pennsylvania?
Yeah.
We gave her that one. She's now short by 25. And Michigan. Now, she's short by 9. New Hampshire, neck and neck at the moment. Not very many votes in that. She could take Maine as well. She could take the 1st district, not the 2nd. She could also take the 2nd in Nebraska, which is basically the city of Omaha, an urban area. And now look at this. She's short by 1. She's on 269. We gave her quite a lot of stuff there, which is definitely not in the bag. But at this point, she has to take Wisconsin or Arizona to win, or he has to take those, and they're both short by 1. And I will leave you and the constitutional experts to explain to us the process that ensues once they're both on 269.
Right, so that's fine, Emily. Thank you very much for that. I think it's called a hospital pass in. It's called a hospital pass in rugby. Well, let me explain what happens. If it is 269, 269, the decision then goes to the House of Representatives. But the House of Representatives, they don't vote as individuals. They vote as states, and each state has 1 vote. So the representatives will have to meet, say for California, decide how they're going to vote. California gets 1 vote. Rhode Island, a state rather smaller than California, also gets 1 vote. And the consequence of this, I would suggest, Norm, given that the Republicans are still going to be in control of the House, that is, if it does go to the House of Representatives, Donald Trump is the president.
And not just that the Republicans control the House, and by the way, the Democrats are going to be disappointed in the results there as well. They'd hoped at least for double-digit gains, and it looks like it's going to be in the low to mid-single digits. But Republicans, because they have many advantages in smaller states, smaller homogeneous states, have a much bigger advantage in the number of states that they control than they do in the overall number of representatives. So Donald Trump would almost certainly win under those circumstances and probably win the presidency handily. Now, this is where the Senate control, though, comes into play as well, because the Senate votes separately on the vice president. And they don't do it by state. They do it as individuals. So if the Democrats had somehow managed, and there's still a tiny chance that they could pull out a victory in the Senate, and they got it to a point where they had even a slim majority, you could end up with a Tim Kaine vice presidency. Now, we're talking fanciful at this point and extremely unlikely to happen. And the Democrats are, I think, very, very, very unlikely to win that majority in the Senate. But it's an interesting twist on American politics.
And the numerate among you will have noticed that if the House votes state by state, there are 50 states. That's also an even number. So theoretically, it's possible the House could divide 25-25. So what happens then? Well, the Speaker of the House becomes president for a period.
Yeah, you need 26. You need an absolute number, and that has to be decided by March. Now, it wouldn't happen that the Speaker would become president because the Senate would almost certainly choose a vice president, and then on Inauguration Day of January 20th, the vice president would get inaugurated, and he would, under the 25th Amendment, become the acting president. So it's also possible that the Republican House could look at Donald Trump and say, we'd rather have Mike Pence.
Right. Well, we're not actually quite there yet.
My brain's getting tired on this. They didn't make it easy, did they?
It's 1:45 in the morning in New York, and we've been looking at this for a long time. I'm not sure how much bandwidth my brain has at the moment, but That's why we have Norm here, so that he can fill us in and keep us on the straight and narrow. Let's go to the Clinton campaign headquarters and find out what is happening now, rather in some hypothetical future. Kim Gatters, it sounds incredibly quiet there at Clinton HQ.
Yes, it is very quiet. What you're hearing is the sound of the big screens and the American networks and their coverage of the event. But the crowd has thinned out. People are sitting down on the floor. We've seen people cry. We've seen people hugging. They simply cannot believe that this is actually happening. They were expecting to celebrate a victory. They were expecting to celebrate the first woman president of the United States. And it's not done yet, but the path, as you've been saying, is looking very difficult at the moment for Hillary Clinton. And there's a lot of hat scratching going on. There'll be a lot of questions being asked, even if she gets a narrow victory, about how did they underestimate the mood in the country to this extent? How did they miss this wave of Trump support? Because I've been traveling with them for the last few weeks and months, and of course you always run the risk of being spun by campaign aides, but they were genuinely sounding upbeat. They were not trying to manage expectations, even though they had said for the last few weeks that the polls would tighten. They said yesterday that this was looking very good. And it wasn't just, putting on a brave face. Putting on a brave face is what they're doing tonight, even though we haven't really heard from any Clinton aides over the last 4 hours as they try to digest what they see unfold in front of them. And I remember speaking to a senior Clinton aide about a few months ago after she'd won the nomination. And I said, how do you feel about this? And this one person, how do you feel about the prospects? And this one person did say that he was worried about the third and fourth party vote, that he was worried that this would dilute some of the support for Clinton or take votes away from her. And we've seen that in some places. But that one person did say there is a lot of anger out there. And perhaps this was not an understanding that was shared by enough people within the Clinton campaign, because they also underestimated the Bernie Sanders movement, of course. They didn't see that coming in the primary season. They did not expect to have such a difficult primary race against a senator from Vermont who was previously barely known. But he led this movement, and he tapped into that same anger, but on the left. And now what we're hearing from some of the people close to the campaign, but not from inside the campaign, is that they're putting a brave face on this. They're watching this unfold. They are trying to see whether it's still possible for her to win. Ken Salazar, the head of her transition team, spoke to an American newspaper and said, it's not over yet, but what we are seeing unfold is astonishing.
Okay, Kim Gatters there at the Clinton campaign headquarters. And just to pick up on that third-party vote, as Kim says, it hasn't been huge in many states, but importantly, it's been millennials, it looks like, who have been voting for those third-party candidates.
For the Libertarian and the
For
Green.
the Libertarian and I imagine particularly for the Green Party candidate, the same people who were drawn to Bernie Sanders and who have said all along that they were not excited by Hillary Clinton's candidacy. And in critical states, it could well be that in voting for third-party candidates, they deprived Hillary Clinton of those states. I mean, Ben, millennials were Barack Obama's coalition. They were his base. That's what propelled him for victory in 2008. What happened to that vote? Why couldn't he pass? Barack Obama, it seems like, is very good at getting Barack Obama elected. It's not necessarily the case that he's getting very good at getting other Democrats elected.
Well, first, let me apologize on behalf of my demographic. I think it sounds like they made a similar mistake to one that voters made with Ralph Nader in 2000, where that could have been the margin in the state of Florida for Al Gore. I think it was a mistake. I think Hillary Clinton embraced many of Senator Sanders' policies during the general election and throughout the course of the primary. If you were looking for somebody who was going to fight for the middle class, who was going to make college affordable, who was going to make sure that there were good-paying jobs for all Americans, no matter what zip code you came from, I think Hillary Clinton was your candidate. But it looks like the millennial numbers tonight were a little bit soft, and a few too many of them may have gone to third-party voters.
Oh, not voted at all?
To candidates.
I mean, that's been the danger. It's been mobilized. I mean, when campaigns depend on people who tend not to vote, you do run into trouble.
You also run into trouble when you rely on someone else's coalition. I mean, the Obama's coalition was there to elect President Obama. And one thing you heard Democrats say in the off-year elections on the years that the House and Senate candidates up where the president wasn't, they felt frustrated that they didn't get the Obama machine behind them, that it wasn't lent out, that it was only for President Obama. So they didn't have a lot of practice test running that coalition. But frankly, it was on Hillary Clinton to put together her own coalition. She should have realized that.
And actually, you know, the Democratic Party throughout the United States under President Obama's time in office has been pretty much decimated. They've lost more than 800 legislators in local offices. They've lost governorships. They have the least numbers of people in the House of Representatives since Second World War. I mean, the President Obama has not left the Democratic Party at a nationwide level in great shape.
And
I
they
think,
thought they could make it work
that.
because his numbers were so high, his favorable numbers in a time where both candidates for president were so upside down and so high, their unfavorables, that with his favorable numbers, they thought maybe he could help bring it in. And that's what we were looking at. Let's face it, yesterday or earlier today, we were thinking that, oh, Hillary Clinton's going to do very well, in part to President Obama.
Is it not possible?
And it turned out it wasn't translatable.
There are a lot of people who voted for Mr. Obama in 2008 probably today voted for Mr. Trump.
There may be a certain percentage that did, but I think what happened tonight is for the Republican Party, this is more of a short-term bet. You know, if Donald Trump was elected with older white voters, as the country becomes more diverse every single year, the people who turned out to vote for Donald Trump were simply a different electorate at the end of the day. And you could still see Hillary Clinton win the popular vote. So with fewer African Americans as a share of the vote and fewer young voters as a share of the vote, it's some of the demographic that will be voting for the final election cycle or final election cycles that may have elected Donald Trump.
But we keep on hearing that the Republican Party, because demography is against it, because it's an increasingly white party, that it's a party in decline. Yet as we sit here tonight, the Republican Party could be heading to retake the White House. It has already retaken the House and will probably retain the Senate. It controls, as we went into tonight, 31 out of 50 gubernatorial offices throughout the state. If that's decline, I could name a list of centre-right parties in Europe that would regard this as success beyond their dreams.
Well, one thing that's, I think, going to be troubling for Democrats, you're right, first in one sense. You look at a state like Iowa, there were people who voted for Barack Obama in 2012 who, in fact, voted for Donald Trump. And we'll find in Pennsylvania, in Michigan, counties that went very strongly for him that went for Trump. But we also know that in North Carolina, for example, a sizable number of votes were suppressed by the laws and the way in which they handled the election sites and precincts and the voter registration. Now we're going to have a Republican Party that as a national party has a struggle building a larger majority, but it's going to have a Supreme Court that will allow very, very tough voter ID laws. It's going to have a party that is going to find all kinds of ways to make it difficult for Democrats to get their voters out and to make them work. So what happened to Democrats, every time you win the White House, you tend to lose in Congress the next time around. You tend to lose in the midterm elections. This makes 2018 very interesting.
Yes.
But
Well,
Republicans
actually,
may find
not
ways
so
to hold
much,
on.
because we knew that this was the hardest cycle for Republicans
Because
to hold
as
the
Democrats
Senate.
are up next
Correct.
time.
In 18,
Yeah.
it looks very likely that they'll hold the Senate, and with the leads that Speaker Ryan's made, he can even increase his
We'll see, though.
majority.
It's, hold on. Money talks. We don't have commercials in the BBC, but we do keep an eye on the financial markets. It's just coming up to 6 minutes to 1 here in New York, East Coast time, which means that it's very soon the European markets will open. followed by the London market. So let's go to the BBC's North American business correspondent, Michelle Fleury. Michelle, what's the latest from the markets?
Andrew, about the fact that investors, the financial markets were hoping for a Hillary Clinton win, but as the prospects for Donald Trump have brightened, you've seen the markets really turn sour. I think it's a case of much like Brexit, where investors were caught wrong-footed. We're seeing that again now. If you look at the Dow futures, the S&P 500 futures, all of them trading down around 4% lower. We're seeing the Mexican peso, which we talked about earlier, hitting all-time lows. All of this in reaction to what now looks like increased prospects for a Donald Trump presidency. And as you were talking about, if the Republicans take the Senate and the House of Representatives, that's a clean sweep. That's also something that the markets are concerned about. They like the idea of the divided government, in part because it maintains more of a status quo. It's harder to get big changes through. That's something that investors will be anxious about, the uncertainty that all of this brings. In particular, what this will mean for global trade, for example.
All right, Michelle, thank you for that. The Mexican peso hitting a record low against the dollar at the prospect of a Trump administration. The FTSE 100, the major British benchmark on the stock exchange, its futures there predicted to be down 4%. Nearly all the major stock markets, I've not seen them yet, but the DAX and the CAC in France, most of them, I'm pretty sure, are going to be falling when they open in just over an hour or so's time. What are they making in China about it?
Well, let's get more global reaction because, of course, one of the countries that Donald Trump actually had a lot of support in was China. The Chinese, despite the fact that Donald Trump has said that China is a currency manipulator and could launch the currency war, actually he gets pretty high approval ratings there. So John Sudworth is there for us in Beijing. John, what are they making of this, do you think, in China today?
Well, you know, I think all along, if you look at the state media coverage of this election campaign, there's been a sense that, you know, really the Chinese elite see themselves as stuck between a rock and a hard place. That there is, of course, no love lost here for Hillary Clinton. She is seen as the architect of the American pivot to Asia, which was seen by many in China as a policy of containment. They know that she's long been critical of the Chinese human rights record, for example. So she's a known quantity, and it's not a quantity they particularly like. And as you say, there's been a lot of interest in Donald Trump. There's a certain amount of recognition of him now amongst the Chinese public. But I think, again, the political elites are far from certain. You know, certainly some of his more strident comments on international trade, you know, bashing China probably harder than any other American presidential candidate ever has over things like currency manipulation, trade protectionism, threatening to put tariffs on goods. Some of that, of course, they may be able to dismiss as just rhetoric ahead of an election. But I think it's the sense that he is an unknown quantity that worries many. Don't forget, the Chinese leadership craves stability beyond anything else. They know that their futures are linked to America's prosperity. And I think there's a sense really that given that, Hillary Clinton is the devil they know, if you like. And I think there will be a large amount of nervousness in the elite political circles as a result of a Trump presidency if it's confirmed today.
OK, John Sudworth there in Beijing. Let's cross over to Moscow. Of course, this is a country where Donald Trump also has something like an 82% approval rating. Sarah Rainsford, this is going to go down well, isn't it, in the Kremlin?
I think it will. I mean, officially speaking, President Putin has been asked about who he preferred to see as president of the United States. And officially, he said he would work with anyone who would work with Russia. But I think the odds are that he's hoping that Donald Trump will be a far easier president to work with than Hillary Clinton would be. Certainly, Hillary Clinton is a known quantity here. She's seen as a hawk. She's seen as anti-Russian. I think personally, President Putin has had a very difficult relationship with her in the past. As for Donald Trump, there's been something something of a bromance between the two men over the past couple of years. There have been some very warm words from Donald Trump in particular, talking about President Putin as a man he thinks he can work with, admiring him as a strong leader. And I think that's obviously something that Russia will welcome. There is a real problem in relations between the United States and Russia at the moment, and there is the potential that Donald Trump in the presidency might theoretically heal something of the rift.
OK, Sarah Rainsford there for us in Moscow. And it's worth pointing out that President Obama himself, Andrew, is heading off to Europe to meet with Angela Merkel and other leaders just next week. Those are going to be very interesting meetings.
You kind of feel they may want to meet Donald Trump instead because they don't know him at all. That's part of the problem. No world leader, starting with the British to the Germans, perhaps with the exception of the Russians, know much about him. It's coming up to 1 o'clock in the morning here, Wednesday morning. We are coming to you live from Times Square. There are the pictures outside in the heart of Manhattan. This